My name is Lucy Bisson, and I'm the chairperson of the Lewiston Planning Board. I welcome you all this evening, and I call this meeting to order. Ms. Kittredge, could you call the roll?
Yes, Roger Dupre.
Here.
Joshua Najin.
Here.
Michael Marcotte.
Present.
Shanna Cox.
Here.
Lucy Bisson.
Here.
Myself, Christine Kittredge. Amy Smith.
Here.
Lee Albert. And Alex Pine.
Hello.
Shelley, are there any adjustments to the agenda?
There are not.
Any correspondence?
Only that I will note that I spoke to a number of residents about the rezoning who called, and there was one individual who called today and left a message saying she didn't want her property rezoned. So when we get there, I can let you know
Okay,
more detail on
that
that.
sounds like a good idea. Okay, we have public hearings. The first one is Platz Associates, on behalf of Trinity Jubilee Center, has submitted a development review application to construct a two-story, 5,500 square foot footprint resource center on a portion of 60 Park Street, which is to be divided into a new parcel. Shelley, or are you? Oh, Craig, it's
Nice,
going to be
Craig
Craig
is
tonight. All right.
See if this thing works.
Sorry.
Right, so we have a new application from Platz Associates for a new nonprofit resource center located on a portion of 60 Park Street facing Bates Street. The current lot is a parking lot. It's entirely paved, and there will be no significant addition of impervious area. There will be a new, or the applicant has proposed a new 12-foot curb cut just on the north end of the lot. This will be used for smaller vehicles, smaller delivery vehicles. There's no parking on the site, but for larger WB-40 vehicles, there will be, they'll use the bus lane on the front of the property. And the applicant has indicated that this will occur, or deliveries will occur from 6 to 7 a.m. on Thursdays. We've had sort of informal discussions with the applicant in January. They sent in a preliminary application on February 2nd after a round of comments from police, fire, public works, and planning, resulted in the revised February 23rd application. And from those two, or from the first preliminary application, we had some comments from Public Works for moving a existing stormwater drain and for blocking out some of the existing parking in order to facilitate parking turnaround on the rear of the building. And with the new application, both of those sort of requests have been met. So police had no comments or no issues with the project. Fire had no issues with the project. And Public Works issues have been all met. Planning had a number of comments. A few of them involved small things like labeling and meeting criteria or changes to the space and bulk matrix that we had made, just sort of updating some of the things. There are two outstanding comments. The first is pretty small. There's just a typo on the page is for dumpster enclosure. The second is the applicant has not fully demonstrated financial capacity, and we're recommending that be a condition of approval moving forward. The applicant has also requested 2 waivers from the Design Lewiston standards. The first to reduce the required windows on the first floor facade from 50% to 25%, and the second for the second floor from 25% to 18%. The applicant has, or Platz, they've addressed their narrative for why they need this on page 11 of their application. And the criteria A through E are also included in the staff memo, but I'd be happy to go over those as well. What else? Or I guess in requesting this waiver, they've stressed the need for privacy and for the safety of their, their clientele that they serve. So we are, based on the revised application from February 23rd, staff are recommending approval of the proposed project with the following conditions: that prior to the issuance of a building permit, proof of financial capacity be provided to code enforcement, and prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy, the applicant's engineer shall certify that all improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plans, including but not limited to utilities, pavements and plantings, and building exterior materials. And you will also need to discuss the waiver request. I think with that, unless there's any other comments, I'll yield the floor to Platz or the applicant.
Before you do that, let me ask the board if they have any questions for you, Craig,
Oh,
first,
certainly.
and then we'll go to the applicant. Michael?
This would probably be the place for it. Thank you. This is probably the time for it. When I was reading down through it, I got a little confused, and I don't know if it's just interchanging vocabulary. It was referred to as non-reflective glass, glazed glass, and nondescript. I guess that must have been one of the phrases. And I'm wondering if it's all basically the same thing. Because I got the impression that non-reflective and glazed, it sounded like two different things, but in context it sounded like it was referring to the same thing.
That might have been an inconsistency in the language that's used. Non-reflective, I believe, is the term in the standards, but I can find that for you pretty quick.
Mike, are you referring to the memo or to the applicant's
It
application?
must have been the memo, because I wrote it at the bottom of the memo, trying to find certain markers in here.
Gotcha. Yeah, so the design district regulations specify non-reflective glass.
Yeah, the third paragraph refers to 50 and 25% non-reflective glass respectively. And then the glazing standard, is that referring to the same thing? Glazing standard and non-reflective glass is the same thing?
Yeah, we don't have a separate glazing standard, so glazing would typically be the glass, so I think that was just a different terminology.
Okay, well, it was the interchanging the terms that caught me. I'm thinking, are we talking about two things, or is it the same thing? Because then, when you read the motion, and my vocabulary of nondescript might have been just me telling myself it was nondescriptive, I don't know. But the motion actually read with only one of the vocabs. So that's why I was wondering.
Gotcha.
They were interchangeable. That's my question for staff.
Okay, anyone else have any questions for staff? Roger?
Shelley, on the last meeting or one of the other meetings that we had regarding the Jubilee, there was mention of public bathrooms in that area, and there's nothing in here reflecting that. Is that still active, or has that been put to bed?
That's actually a great question for the applicant. I'm not sure staff is, unless you saw that mentioned in the package. I didn't notice. Okay. Yeah,
Okay,
that'd be a
well,
great question.
We'll ask the applicant when he comes up. Josh?
Just to clarify, the two waiver requests are concerning the first and the second floor windows, not, because there's a lot of mention of landscaping, but we're not asking for a waiver on the landscaping, correct?
No,
No,
it's
they
just on,
mean-
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
the first and
Gotcha.
second floor.
And actually, a point of clarification, so the non-reflective glass requirement is on a street-facing facade. And unfortunately, I guess for this applicant at this point in time, you could interpret it that they have 4 street-facing facades because of the lack of buildings on the Park Street side and the visibility of it. So it would be a lot of required glass for them.
Okay. All right, yes.
It's a comment for staff.
Okay,
That's
sure.
okay. And I say this to staff before we hear from the applicant, in part because I think today is a second, third point in the glazing standard that we put in with the best of intentions in the design standards, but have heard from more than one applicant that it's not necessarily in keeping with energy efficiency or best practices, and as today's application has, I think, offered us some really nice visual aids, is also not necessarily in keeping with the visual identity of surrounding buildings in the neighborhood. And so, regardless of how we choose to go on today's application, it does feel like a reminder with some really nice materials that we didn't need to prepare about the glazing standard when we revisit that.
Okay. All right, if the applicants would come up, excuse me, come up to the table, introduce yourselves, and tell us what you want us to hear.
Hello?
Yep.
Hi, great. I'm Adam Lemire. I'm an architect at Platz Associates, and Tom Platz is also here as well, and Chris from Trinity Jubilee. Thank you for the very good explanation of the project. I think you have a lot of what you need. So just in case anyone doesn't know, Trinity Jubilee Center is a current program that exists in the basement of the Trinity Jubilee Church, which is a couple blocks away. It's on the corner, but it's on Bates Street. And so this is a much-needed service for the community, and this facility will basically just increase their ability to serve the community. So nothing is really changing from their mission within this, but this building will facilitate that further. So, yeah, the building is situated, as he said, on a relatively flat site. It's all paved, so we're not really changing much from that standpoint. The front, very similar to how it is now, is going to be a strip of plantings. We're adding quite a bit of bushes and 2 new trees onto the front to really green that space a little bit more. There's the majority of the site is going to be filled with the building, with some buffer around it, about 4 feet on each side. And then on the north side, there's a 12-foot loading zone, which is completely fenced off with privacy fencing, 7 feet tall, wood. And that's really to just contain that area. Within that kind of midway, there's a trash collection that's completely screened in a similar way. And that's actually, you can see in, for anyone that's looking at the screen, it's at the top left is the screening. The majority of, and maybe I'll go to the second page. Oh, is it this one maybe? Yeah. I'll just go through the facade real quick. This is the front facade as looking from Bates Street. This is depicting the same side facade. It's 20 feet tall, which is the minimum requirement in the district, with this raising to 24 feet in the center. We tried to keep the building in keeping with the general context. There's a wide variety of heights of buildings, but for a reference point, The top part of the building is roughly the bottom of the parking deck, bottom of the top parking deck. So if you can imagine, continuing over here, that's roughly where the height of the parking deck, top of the parking deck is. So it will feel very similar in scale to that vertically. It's obviously narrower, but the central entrance here is going to be the main way in and out. And so there's a front desk just on the opposite of that. We have provided the public bathroom just off of this door. So you have to walk, apologies that I don't have the plan to show you, but basically you walk in, there's a front desk with sliding glass windows. That's the person that will always greet you. And then just to the left of that is a public bathroom that, we can add that as an amendment to the application, but that is the intent. And then on the front, you can see there's a little kind of in the a black metal gate in the front that's both protecting the plants and kind of creating an edge at the sidewalk. And then you can see two large trees in the front. And as was discussed earlier, the requirement for glazing for 50% on the base, categorically, there's a requirement for residential buildings and for commercial buildings. And we fall within the commercial designation, but ultimately this isn't really a commercial building. It's a public service building, but we tried to get as close to meeting that requirement as we could without sacrificing the safety and privacy of the clientele and staff. And so we've provided quite a bit, and I believe it fits very well within the character of the neighborhood, in that there's a series of windows with spaces in between, roughly the same proportion, or the same proportion, but roughly the same size as you'll find in the neighborhood. And then obviously there's a central entry kind of celebrating that entrance a little bit more with the swoop at the top. There's a secondary entry over here, and that's just for lunches being picked up. Food isn't served on the premises, but there is a similar program now, or the same program at their current location where people pick up box lunches and leave. There's actually a line on the inside of the building, so they'll come in and go out the side gate, and the intention is to allow people to come inside to wait rather than wait outside. So this door will just be open. It's just for an hour at lunch, something like 11 to 12. People come in and out and leave. But primarily this will be the main entry on the building. And this, let's see, this is the north facade. While I don't feel like any of these other facades are truly the front facade, we did stick with, there's a requirement for no more than 15 feet of blank facade, and I think as being a good neighbor, that makes sense to fit that need. So the north, the south, and then the back elevation, they all meet that requirement with a rhythm of windows wrapping around it. And let's see. As was discussed, deliveries will generally be small vehicles that will back into, using the bus lane, which is all the way across the front of the site. They'll pull in here and then back into the loading zone that again is fenced off. Those are just personal size vehicles like a van or a car. Larger trucks will park the length of the building with their back end back here for deliveries to come in. That's like a 18-wheeler, 16-wheeler. And that's been reviewed with AvCog, and they've provided with us with a letter that they're okay with that, and that it, for our use, that makes sense. As was stated, we're not using any parking on the premises. There's a huge parking lot back here, municipal lot, as well as the parking garage. Generally, there's not a lot of people. I think there's, a handful of staff members, maybe 3. It's in the material, but 3 staff members and a couple of volunteers that will park in the lot and come in the front. Yeah, so again, I'm happy to answer as many questions. But as I've said, I think this is a much needed service, and this facility will only improve that service. So.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Yes, I'm sorry. Lee?
Oh, sure. Thank you for that. I'm just curious more from a programmatic sense. So it's a 5,500 square foot building. What is that coming from as I think about the basement of the church currently, just the increase in square footage?
Sure. So it is essentially the same programming, okay? So essentially there's a day shelter. There's no night use, just during the same hours. Day shelter is going to increase in size. It's woefully inadequately, actually everything's woefully inadequately sized. But that will increase in size. There's a commercial kitchen inside that's used to prepare the meals. Again, nothing's served directly there. There's a large amount of storage, which will really increase. I think that's really like the biggest thing that Trinity needs is storage space in order to take in donated items, process, and then be able to distribute those back out. So it's becoming, I think, a much more well-oiled machine as far as.
Right, but I think what Lee is looking for is, what's the square footage at the church currently?
It's rough. It's
Just
yeah.
roughly.
It's between. I don't know if you know, but yeah, it's
About
that's what I was
3,000,
gonna
and you're
say,
going
roughly.
to 5,500?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, just almost doubling.
Yeah.
As a
Thank you.
clarification, isn't it 11,000, because it's a 2-story building and
Ye-
that's the footprint?
Yeah, and the additional square footage on the second floor is only intended as storage.
Got it.
And that's just, again, this long-term capacity of being able to take in a winter jacket in the spring and be able to save it until the next.
Right.
I mean, I think it's all fantastic. I was just
Fantastic.
curious.
Yeah, I see. So yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
Alex?
I was curious about the rear facade in terms of how it's interacting with the property line, if there's going to be any plantings or anything back there. I have the joy, question mark besides that, of interacting with this lot on a pretty regular basis because I park there and then walk to my office. And yeah, you'll see a lot of the building from behind too. I think there's a lot of traffic that goes through that lot. It's a very nice sort of informal pedestrian space.
Yep.
Not nice in the term of it being pleasant to be in, but nice in the sense that it's useful
Yeah.
for folks. So yeah.
sure. So I'm just going to go around the facade. Obviously, we've already talked about the front, and then I'll go around to the sides. This is planning on being a wood stockade fence, so it'll be a fairly nice human scale addition to the space, which is just an open big parking lot. In the back, the plan on here is just to do, if I can remember.
Short metal fencing, similar to the one in the front on the back on one of your.
No, there's, so.
Can you switch to the elevations, maybe? It
Sure.
might be-
But I'm gonna, we'll
I
talk.
think we talked about a curb back there. Was
Yeah.
that what you were doing?
I'll just say real quick, and then I'll go to the elevations. The intention here is to do a curb along this edge, and then do crushed stone in between that and the building. So there is no plan right now to do plantings, but we would be open to some level on the back. On this side, there's an existing fence that all we're doing is connecting it so that someone can't access that point, but on the front and the back. So we're just tying into the existing.
Is that chain link?
It's it's chain link, and it's owned by the neighboring property. Here, I'll just go to the. I can just go here. So along this side is a chain link fence that then we're tying in with our new fence on the front. And then on the back, it's just like this. There's a curbing right here, but not much else than that. Not to get ahead of myself, this is way in the future and ideally we would. Well, I shouldn't even say that. It's hard to say. I would personally love to see a mural on this building. I think this really would be a great spot for a mural, but that is like a separate item. We're not saying, hey,
There'll be a mural when we build it.
Exactly. I'm not saying approve a mural, but the intention would be to put something up like that on especially the back end, which is so visible. I mean, this is a very visible site.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely strikes me as a place that will invite a formal or informal mural at some point.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine.
You're
It
right,
livens
you're
up
right.
the space. Could you also talk a little bit about, I know and maybe this is more of a question for staff, the parking structure does have an exit there that sort of comes out into the lot. And I know it's not really associated
here?
with the project, but how is that going to change traffic flow through there? I know, as someone who has a fence that adjoins a parking area at their house, fences get bonked when they're near cars.
It's a little hard to see this. I can't really see the parking spots. I think the line is about here.
Yep.
Well, it's along the D-ish there. So there's ample room. I mean, that's a bit of a risk of being there.
There's no curb there, it's just a fence to
We
the
weren't
asphalt.
planning on a curb, but it might be advisable for us to do so to protect it, but.
Yeah.
Be curious how often that entrance gets used in the parking garage, though. It feels like the other two are front.
I don't think it's well used at all. I mean, anecdotally, as someone who parks right above it. But in the wintertime, it gets a little wild over there in terms of like people just trying to wedge cars in and stuff. And I definitely, people race through there at night for fun. So,
Oh, okay.
which, no judgment.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so I would be curious if there's maybe something to, provide a little more
The-
of.
Well, the problem with a curb is it's going to be right at the bottom, and the bumper of the car is going to hit the
Right.
fence before it hits the tires hit the curb.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I'm worried about a vehicle going through the fence, where if you have the curb, it'll damage the fence but won't keep going.
The problem is, I think your fence is probably right on the line,
Essentially,
and,
yeah, just
and
fine.
so they'd
Gotcha.
have to go on the city property to put a curb so that it would have the space, so that the front tires. So I don't think that's
So
a practical
maybe it's not within
thing.
this project.
No,
but
I don't think it's,
Just sort of
yeah,
looking at
it
it.
doesn't seem to be something that would be practical, I think. It's a good idea, but it's not practical.
It's
Josh?
a good suggestion to the applicant. If the board doesn't want to require that as part of this, the applicant might consider whether they have the space to move the fence back, 6 or 8 inches to put a curb in.
I'm not sure 6 or 8 inches is going to be much help with the front of your car. What, it's 1.5 feet before you get to the tires? 6 inches isn't going to make a difference. Anyways, okay, Josh.
Just a couple of questions. First, just concerning the programming. So it seems like we're duplicating what we're going to be doing at Trinity at the new location, or are just all of those functions going to move to the new location?
My understanding is everything's moving. Is that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was one. Two, to note, sort of what Alex was indicating, there's basically a bike ped path that runs from Fry Street down crosses onto College Ave and then goes through that parking lot there. It's kind of like a natural way that people like avoid cars. So it's just something to think about, like there's people that do walk along interior of that space. And then just as a separate just thought, like our emergency services, they'll respond to the front of the building, like right at the,
Yep.
as opposed to coming through the parking lot.
Well, they're right across the street.
Well, the ambulances, yeah. Well, not the ambulance, the fire department.
Fire department's right across the street.
Yeah, I'm just talking about like, just generally like police, like how, if you're coming down, I'm just thinking about like how quickly you can respond to something because of how awkward the getting into the back of that parking lot is. So you'd have to go all the way around.
Well, yeah, but I think they'd respond on the street, on Bates Street, wouldn't they? I mean,
Right.
I can't imagine they're going through parking lots to get to
I think it
building.
really depends on where they're coming from at any given time. But it was just a consideration as far as like how traffic moves in and out of the back of that area. Like, is there any thought to like opening any of that up at all?
It's your lot, so we don't
Yeah.
have any control over lanes or,
Right.
if you're going to fight a fire, they'll fight on the street.
Yeah, exactly.
They probably just have a hose come from here all the way across the street.
Just cross the,
Yeah,
cross
I
the
can
street
see
with the hose, yeah,
Fire
right.
department's right there. It's just a question of like, no, I get you.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Does it-
Anybody else have any questions? Michael?
I don't know if the bathroom question's fully answered. But, yeah, I have a couple. So as far as the bathroom, is it a public bathroom that will be 24-hour access
It's not 24-hour. It's during the operational hours.
during operational hours only? As far as the windows, the diagrams are with the waiver in mind, correct?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What you've presented here
Yep.
is with the waiver in place?
Correct.
Okay. Because I find the window placement perfectly acceptable. I'm not a fan of a lot of these design standards and guidelines anyway. And I'm not sure why, a little bit of a statement, why we have them if we're always waiving them, but in this case, it makes absolutely sense. Now, it's been referred to as 60 Park Street, and the front of the building is facing Bates Street, right? Is it going to have a new address?
It will, and that's part of a separate subdivision that the city is doing, so it will fall under that.
And if I understand north, east, south, and west correctly, the north side of the building is the one that, so if you're looking at the front of the building on the right-hand side, that'd be going down the north side of the building, correct? Okay. I noticed in the material, it looked like in the plans that that's where the trash was.
Yep.
And in some of the comments from Public Works, it looked like they were making asks that were in the rear of the building for purposes of, I thought it was for trash removal. There's a red hash-marked area.
That was referring to parking. So this is currently a series of parking spots that we're occupying. And so they were suggesting that there be a turnaround, basically one of those spots be designated as a turnaround spot. Now, we're not going to say how it should be done or how it should or shouldn't be done, but we just showed kind of what they had recommended. So I can go to that real quick and go to it a little closer.
I guess I had the notion that that's where the trash receptacle was going to be, and it seemed to conflict.
No, the trash is
No, the trash is on the side.
On the side.
yeah, and it's
But-
accessed.
but I-
Where the fence, where the wooden stockade fence
Yeah,
is.
but when I went through the packet, I kind of got the notion that the Public Works comments on the rear of the back of the building was in relation to trash removal.
No, but they did bring up the height difference.
Maybe that's how I connected the two, okay. It's I'm probably good on that.
Okay, you all set? Does anybody else have any other questions? All right, this,
Go for it.
Amy?
I just had one comment on the glazing and the number of windows. I found it super helpful to have all the photos of the surrounding buildings, because I was sort of trying to visualize it, so thanks for including that in the
Yeah,
packet.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Alex?
I was thinking more about the privacy fence for the loading zone. You mentioned that it's human scale, but it's a standard 7-foot wooden privacy fence.
Yep.
And it's going to be uniform height the whole length of the building, or width, or however you want to think about it.
Length of the fence.
Yeah, is there, and it's a solid wood fence. Again, sort of speaking to maybe to Josh's point, and then also what we've talked about before of that being sort of an informal pathway through that, that block. Is there a possibility to make it so that it gives more of a sense of like entrance as you get closer to the street, or perhaps even shortening it? I don't know. Is the idea to hide sort of the activity that's going on behind there, or is it more to just sort of keep dust and debris from within those trash areas from exiting? Like what's the purpose of the privacy fence?
Yeah, so it's partially because of privacy. I'd say also the height is just generally so it deters people from trying to get over it as well, that it's not like a 4-foot fence that you could, or 5-foot that you could just jump over. But it is really just to conceal the property. You know, a vehicle will pull in back there. They'll be going in and out of the vehicle with stuff. You know, it's just not as exposed. It's and then again, you know, we need to already, per the ordinance, put a fence around the
dumpster.
The dumpster, and so it felt natural to do that. And then we have a little space in the back that we could use for different uses, but.
Because I guess for, you know, sort of all intents and purposes, having that 7-foot privacy fence when you're a person means that there is no windows on that side of the building. Functionally, when you're looking at it from like a visual weight standpoint, it's just a wall. So I wonder if there's a way to either vary the height of the fence or vary the material of the fence between the you know, trash can stockade, which definitely should have a 7-foot fence, and perhaps having it be lower or maybe more permeable visually for the loading area. I can understand, you know, wanting to have sort of a privacy concern for loading and unloading, but I also wonder about, you know, most of the time that space is not going to have a vehicle in it. And when it doesn't, it's sort of just going to be this little hole from the street front. So it's going to be very sort of tubular, very, very much a tunnel, because you have the wall of the building and the fence.
Yeah, there is a gate on the front of the building too.
Oh, okay. So it's
So at
just
least
totally,
generally it will be
totally enclosed all the time.
Yeah. And just from I totally recognize and appreciate your thoughts. The thought behind it being human scaled is just that it's closer in, you know, the building is a 20-foot tall building. Just to have something that's a little closer to a human size is all I meant. And it's a different color and has a different kind of warmth to it, and it's made of smaller elements. So that was the intent. We can definitely look at varying the height or making it a little bit more interesting maybe than just a straight fence. But I think those are good points. I think generally it would be mostly used as a privacy fence towards the front, but I can see there being some punctures or points at which it breaks up a bit.
Yeah, or just, you know, something that sort of breaks it up visually.
Yeah.
Because that's really the idea of having
Yeah.
the window requirement. From a staff standpoint, since I'm new to all this, is our 25% requirement for all the facades on the ground level aggregated, or is it 25 each facade?
So it's each facade. Let me just pull that language again, because not necessarily would all the facades be affected, although in this case I think they are.
It looks like they raised the windows on that facade to give you more window over the fence.
But, you know, you're talking at that point, that's 8 feet and up, so.
If you're standing close to it.
Yeah,
If you're walking between it and the parking garage, you're probably seeing the tops of the windows.
Yeah, so it's facades that are visible from a public street. So there's a little bit of a interpretation here as to kind of which facades are visible from a public street. And so what staff said was, well, if you're asking for a waiver anyway, ask for all 4 sides, because it, in this specific situation, it seems like, other than you've pointed out the first floor with that fence, it seems like all 4 sides today are visible. Maybe in the future, they won't be as there's more infill development.
Yeah, and as I said before, we felt that the 15-foot maximum blank facade was being a good neighbor and making sure that we don't have a facade that's just all blank on the back or sides. But the amount of glass, as I said before, it just doesn't fit with the programming to make it that much. And, you know, separate from this project, 50% of glazing on the first floor is a lot of glass. And for some commercial uses, it makes sense, but for this program, it really does not make any sense. And again, you can see from the elevations that there's quite a few windows. It's not lacking in glazing.
Okay.
And for energy also is obviously just also
Right.
another thing that we have to contend with.
Right. Okay, anybody else have any other questions or comments? Okay, at this time, I'll open it up to the public. If you wish to speak, would you please step up to the podium, state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes to speak on whether you positive or negative. Going once? All right. I'm going to close it to the public, and I will bring it back to the board. I'll entertain a motion if there are no more questions or comments.
I'm happy to make a motion.
Please do.
I'd like to make a motion that the waiver request by Platz Associates on behalf of Trinity Jubilee Center to reduce the required windows on the first floor facade from 50 to 25%, and to reduce the required windows on the second floor facade from 25 to 18%, meets the 5 waiver criterias A through E of Article 11, District Regulations, Section 24, Additional Overlay District Regulations, Subsection 5, Design District Standards H, waivers, and that approval be granted. One motion at a time?
Please.
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Roger. Any further discussion on the board? Okay, in that case, I'll
wait.
call.
I was just,
Sorry.
as she was reading that, I was noticing, what's the difference in 3 of those facades, first and second floor? Because we're reducing based on each floor. And so, well, let's say the front is the east side. So that, the top left-hand corner is what, the west side? No.
Top left is south.
The west side would be on the right-hand corner. So, yeah, the south side. So it's actually a combination of both floors, none of those windows? Because I don't see 2 sets of windows.
Right,
laterally.
yeah. Generally, the windows are just on the first floor, as the second floor is storage. We're not planning on putting additional windows.
Because the way the motion reads, it says second floor facade from 25 to 18 meets the 5 waiver criteria. And it just caught my attention that there's no real differential between first and second floor here. No, at least not on 3 of the
For
facades.
the other 3 facades, yeah.
No, just the front.
Yeah.
Does this get to Shelley's point around the intent by which we are all hearing, seconding, and making this motion, and by which the applicant came forward today, which is that the 2 facades named in this motion, the first floor and second floor facade, are really only talking about the Bates Street facade or the front facade? Is that how we and your permitting inspectors would also review this?
I'm not sure that's the case. I think that might be an oversight on our part. I don't,
I think,
we would draw like a line 10 feet and
Yeah.
say what's above and what's below.
yeah, I think you're right, Shannon. I mean, I think the intent was to have the principal facade of these buildings taken into consideration, and this is unique because we can see this building because it's in the middle of a parking lot. And as Shelley's recommendation was, they've tried to meet some intent of that, but, you know, instead of doing no windows or anything on there. So maybe to Mike's point, it might not be, and I don't know, maybe Adam can speak to this, or not, it may be a moot point, but is 18% going to apply to those other three facades, I guess is what you're asking.
Because the windows on the other three facades actually, up and down, are above the halfway point. So they are actually affecting the second floor.
Right, so we don't.
Seems that way anyway.
And we don't necessarily know, given the way that it's drawn here. I don't know that's necessarily an issue for you folks, but it's a good point in that 18% might not be really truly representative of what's being requested for that.
Could we satisfy all parties? Quick straw poll, because I think I've already heard the affirmative from most of my planning board members, but we were all satisfied with the drawings that we saw today. Just gut check real quick. Could we amend my motion to note, as stated, and that the west, north, and south elevations for the second floor facade would be accepted at a 0%? That just like be super crystal clear for everybody about what we're approving and allow the architects to finish designing this as is?
I'd suggest not necessarily 0, but as represented on the plans, because if they come back with an amended plan that shows nothing on that, your motion would have allowed for that to occur.
Okay. May I amend my motion?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Who seconded?
Everybody fine with it?
Not me.
Roger, do you second? All right.
Second, yeah.
Take this one, well, let me put it on for size here. I'd like to amend my motion to state, yada, yada, from 25 to 18%, comma, as presented in the plans, comma, meets the blah, blah, blah. Can I just insert that there and make everything feel good?
Yeah, does that work, everybody? Okay. And that,
Second.
Michael?
I didn't have any problem with the original motion. I was just.
If there's any other interpretation issues, I want there to be a good record.
I was just curious because the windows did seem to drive up above the second floor, although I did have a follow-up question. Is the second floor the same, basically the same ceiling height as the first floor? Is it divided 50-50, first and second? Or is the second floor is it like 60-40? As far as the height?
It's close to 50-50.
It's 50-50.
Yeah.
So with the drawing, it does look like the windows go above the second floor. And from that perspective, I think it in some way meets the original reference. So either way, I was going to support this, so.
Okay. All right. Roger Dupree.
Wait.
Just
Yes, Josh?
a quick well, it's important to what we're doing here, I think.
Yes.
But basically, the design standards were originally based on the concept that we were trying to encourage a particular type of development. And obviously, this type of development isn't what we were looking to encourage originally. But what I wanted to state personally is that I think Trinity Jubilee has been a good faith partner in finding solutions and for hard problems. And the fact that this infill is happening in a space that has been so open and vacant for so long, across the street from a fire station and a parking garage, seems like a really good start to starting to put something into those spaces. So I just wanted to comment that.
Okay. All right. Roger Dupree.
Yes.
Joshua Najin.
Yes.
Michael Marcotte.
Yes.
Shanna Cox.
Yes.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
And Amy Smith.
Yes.
And Lucy Bisson, yes. Happy building.
Thank you.
All right.
Don't change anything on the plans, though.
Yeah, right.
That's why I was trying to avoid that reference.
Do we have to make a motion on
Uh,
the second
hold on.
portion?
We have a
Oh,
second
yeah, we have a
motion.
second
Yeah.
motion. I'm sorry, guys.
Sorry.
Oh, that's right.
I was prepared for it. Do you want me to do it?
Okay,
You're gonna do
yeah.
it?
I'm not doing it.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make another motion. Thanks. I'd like to make a motion that the application submitted by Platz Associates on behalf of Trinity Jubilee Center for an 11,000 square foot nonprofit resource center to construct on the southeast corner of the existing lot at 60 Park Street facing Bate Street meets all of the necessary criteria contained in the zoning and land use code, including but not limited to Article 13, Section 4, approval criteria, and that approval be granted prior to these conditions, that prior to the issuance of a building permit, proof of financial capacity be provided to code enforcement, and that prior to issuance of a certificate of occupancy, the applicant's engineer shall certify that all improvements have been completed in accordance with the approved plans, including but not limited to utilities, pavements and plantings, and building exterior materials.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roger Dupree.
Yes.
Joshua Najin.
Yes.
Michael Marcotte.
Because I was opposed to the disposition of the property, I will abstain.
Okay. Shanna Cox.
Yes.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
Amy Smith.
Yes.
Lucy Bisson. Yes. Okay. Happy building now. Okay. And Ms. Cox has asked for a 5-minute recess.
You're welcome.
So,
We'll give that back to Mr. Marcotte.
oh, okay. It's his request. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I,
Keep me before he says.
okay. No, I might as well do it.
Right, if there was more than one, I'd think about it. You're gonna have an 8-minute recess if we all go.
I guess we could all have
I'm still
two separate
considering.
meetings of the body.
Yeah.
Just keep in mind, these mics are recording,
Yeah.
so, you know, no dirty jokes or anything.
Right. We're all human with biological needs is the summary of this little conversation.
Yep. One thing that's kind of a challenge about that is should that property ever change hands? But, I mean,
Well, it's a nice building. I think it's very attractive.
well, hopefully it takes some pressure off of Aurora as well.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the challenge with Aurora is it's just completely surrounded by needs-based services that are makes me overflowing with her space.
If I don't go before this next piece, I might have to in the middle.
See, they have the
never made it to
thing
a
with
map
the
unless
public
it's very
bathrooms,
different.
you know, that,
Just saying.
you know, what they're trying to,
But now I'm
I
thinking,
think
you
the
know,
last meeting we had, brought this up, was that they wanted a bathroom down there on a 24-hour basis. Now he's telling us that they're gonna have a public bathroom, but it's only during hours of operation. Hours of operation is what,
How are your eyes?
9 to 5?
you know what? You're gonna laugh.
I mean, one of the challenges with events here is just that it's so,
I had flowers delivered to
you know,
work from
I think about like the police department.
business consulting support with, and then Chad brought me flowers for Valentine's Day. And I think maybe, you know, when I get to flowers, I'm dying in my own outfit.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, hasn't
Maybe no reason to
really
be
happened
hanging out
since.
there and also.
yeah.
I mean,
So it could be whichever one of the, it could be,
But ultimately, like, we should
trying to think
Or
if there was
perhaps
like
with
a
a
flower that was
flower.
within both of them.
yeah. You know, sometimes it might be just the greens too.
You know, like, there's usually like, I don't know, bathrooms and
Yeah.
facilities, things to do, you know, like as opposed to being like,
Oh, I do too.
There it is. There's a tree.
Yeah,
So it's an
I
interesting
often
thing, and I
will
know
just,
that, like,
especially in the winter,
municipally,
I'll
like,
often buy myself flowers. You know, at the grocery store, go in and pick up a bouquet.
Best New Year's resolution
should
that
be
I
something
kept to
to for
one
the
year
future because
was to have fresh
little
flowers
kids
in
need
the house
bathrooms.
every week.
Right.
And many times I would cut some
The
myself
thing
or
is, I think we have
stop somewhere on the road,
get off the bus,
Yeah, I didn't like
traveling on the
kill
bus.
my budget that way. Steal a little.
Sure.
You
is.
There should be an indication
Well, it looks like
somewhere
it's
to
mine, but
say,
it's not.
you know,
I can bring it if you want me to.
at the Jubilee Trade Center.
Yeah, no, you're.
All right,
you're
I
And
don't,
that's
didn't
another-
pay attention when but it should be pretty close to 5 minutes.
The trains, right? So like, train service is gonna speed up the delivery to other centers. And so like, you could that was like, yeah, I don't think it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's,
yeah.
even though I don't think they're late.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back to order, and we'll have our second public hearing. The planning board sending a recommendation to the city council for amendments to the zoning and land use code, including Article 2, definitions, Article 3, official map, Article 6, nonconformance, Article 11, district regulations, and Article 12, performance standards. Craig?
So there have been a number of sort of revisions and additions in the last few, weeks and months in preparation for LD 2003. And most recently, we've been focusing on implementing accessory dwelling units into our code. So starting with that, we've taken in-law apartments, and we've replaced that with accessory dwelling units. And a lot of the other changes have been trying to sort of match that language and be consistent. We've added the definition for accessory dwelling unit. What else we've done? We have specified that it is not to be considered the same as an accessory structure, like a garage or a shed, or has different rules regarding it. We've added we have created a new, or we've revised the definition for home occupation to make it more flexible. We've allowed, let's see, I can find it eventually. Right, so the purpose was to allow one additional person to be able to work on the premises that does not live there. So a home occupation right now, as it's written, can allow anyone who lives there. Nobody who does not live on the premises can work as a home occupation. We've changed that to allow up to one person not living on the premises. We have revised the definitions for automobile repair garages and automotive services, except repair. This was from conversations with the city attorney, who, actually maybe Shelley can.
Yeah, sure. So we've had some situations where staff was unclear how to classify a towing business and their associated impound yard based on our current definitions. So we had looked at NAICS and those numbers, which are referenced in both those two definitions, and it was the city attorney's interpretation that those both would include towing and impound yard. So just for clarification, for the purposes of staff and for business owners who are looking to relocate or locate in the city, we just want to add that specifically so people don't have to go and look and question it. We've already had an interpretation.
I don't think he's done.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. And lastly, it's two more. We've deleted the setback area dash front, which is language pertaining to the design district overlay. we, or I suppose staff, cannot find that used within that section of the ordinance. It's not something that it's there, and it's probably something that we took from another city, but never really incorporated it into our own standards. It's just sort of, hanging on, and we just never really used it. So that's gone. We axed that. Lastly, we revised the tiny home definition, and this is to ensure compliance with state law passed in 2021, and that requires they be allowed on an individual house lot where single-family dwellings are allowed. Place anywhere a single-family detached dwelling can be placed. So we just added that on. Those are the main points.
All right, we'll stop there and we'll go on, we'll do it in steps. Michael?
Yeah, I was curious back on item 3. With the revision definitions for auto repair garages and automotive services except repair. This is the definitions are for citywide, it's not just Lisbon Street.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make it more restrictive or less restrictive? Is it zone impact?
It doesn't really change anything because we've received that interpretation from the attorney, so that's how we would proceed as staff, would be to allow that use in those two zones. All this does is kind of codify it in plain English so everybody can see that, and staff, 10 years from now, if we're not here, doesn't ask the same question.
Which two zones?
Definitions. So we can look at zones to see where those definitions are allowed, but those two uses, automobile repair garages and automobile services, except repair, both are, we've been given the interpretation, would include towing an impound yard.
Well, that's what caught my attention.
Yep.
I want to make sure that towing and impound is still permitted, and I'm not sure what the zone
So there
is.
aren't really any other uses that staff found in our definitions
So
where
it
these would go. So the question was, we have to allow it somewhere, we have them throughout the city,
Yeah.
but what is the use? And so the interpretation came down that both of these definitions it would be included in.
So as far as towing and impound, would it make anybody currently in business non-conforming?
This is broadening inclusivity.
Broadening? Well, that's what, I guess it was an awkward question
It's
at
codifying
first.
how staff would categorize
So it's broadening
that
it, not
use.
restricting it. Okay.
Yeah, if you want to use that terminology, yes, I would say broadening as opposed to restricting.
Okay, I'm okay with it then.
Anybody else?
I just noticed a note that I just made when you're talking about tiny houses. I was reading down through it. So my understanding is that it would be they could be on a slab without a foundation.
I believe a tiny house needs to be, state language defines it as being on a chassis.
Well, I saw the phrase chassis, and I got thinking, well, if it's allowed almost anywhere, and right now, if you're building a home, you have to have a foundation, but no, with this, you wouldn't?
No, but I will say a tiny home is not a small house, so it's 300 square feet or smaller. So it's quite tiny, it's very specific, and the state definition is specific. So there's a very small group of structures that would fit that tiny home definition.
There may be an unintended consequence if we start seeing like a small home, almost trailer-sized, sitting there in the middle of our NCA or NCB somewhere.
They can do that today because state law required in 2021 that all municipalities allow this. So all we're doing is adding it to our definition to kind of clarify that, but we have to say yes today anyway, regardless of what you guys do with this definition.
And to Shelley's point, and it is an important distinction because this happens a couple times a month, there's a difference. People ask about tiny homes all the time, and often they just want a small house. tiny house is very specific per definition, talks about a chassis. You all of a sudden you tell people what a tiny house is, and they're like, oh, I don't want one of those. I just want a small house. Oh, great, then build a small house. But a tiny house has to be on a fixed chassis and is subject to different requirements.
I have family members that live in trailers, and they see all these web pictures of tiny houses, and they're falling in love with it. I don't think they fully understand, but it seems that their intent with living in something even smaller than their current space, and it's like, I can't picture that, especially not in Maine with our frost and everything else, and our past requirements of having foundations.
Shannon?
Anyway.
I'm just calling out E in the definition that says, essentially, it can be placed anywhere that single-family dwellings can be placed. So you wouldn't see it in one of our zones where a property is only for business or industrial use. You can't just like drag a tiny home on a chassis.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so shall we vote on that?
I'm really sorry, I have one clarifying question for staff.
Absolutely.
In home occupations, under number 1, and I'm not for designing for the 2% exception to the rule, so I am more than happy hearing that that's the case. I'm just thinking of a place where there's a single-family home that has a mother-in-law's apartment, which is now the single-family attached, and then a tiny home on chassis gets rolled into the backyard, and everybody wants to have a home business. This would not allow that, or would allow someone to seek a waiver? I know it's nuts, but I'm thinking of like grandma with her home jewelry business in the mother-in-law's apartment and the single-family tiny home in the backyard, and dad's doing a CPA business on the first floor, and I don't want any of us to have to deal with that because I didn't ask this question bravely right now. So there you go.
So number 2, I think this is getting at what you're asking. So number 2, we did add accessory dwelling unit language, and what you've just described, which is a tiny home in the backyard of a single-family house, would be an ADU essentially, or could be classified as an accessory dwelling unit.
A single family with an attached dwelling and the tiny home in the backyard.
Then that would be 2 accessory dwelling units, which we, depending upon what you and council decide, only allow 1.
Okay.
That's how we've written it.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, great, because I wasn't sure I did.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, so shall we have a motion for,
Do we have to open it to a public hearing?
oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for keeping me. Okay, so we'll open it to the public, and does anyone have any comments or questions on the definitions section? Okay. Anybody? All right, I'll close it to the public, bring it back to the board, and I'll entertain a motion.
Sure. I'm going to repeat this same one until we get to the maps. I'm just looking for staff to make sure I'm on the right page, literally. I'd like to make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Article 17, Section 5 of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for amendments to Appendix A, Zoning and Land Use Code, Article 2, definitions, period. Great.
Do I have a second? Roger? Any further discussions? Roger Dupree?
Yes.
Joshua Najee?
Yes.
Michael Marcotte?
Yes.
Shanna Cox?
Yes.
Christine Kittredge?
Yes.
Amy Smith?
Yes.
Lucy Bisson? Yes. All right, next step, Lisbon Street. Okay. I have a question before we start. I'm looking at this, and there's a section of Lisbon Street that's not included.
Yes, there were no changes proposed there, so.
Well, that's what I assumed.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, this time around is, so actually that is a distinction. Previously, we'd kind of included maps and said no change, and this time we just kind of took those out, so I apologize for any confusion.
No, it's fine. Okay.
Okay, so Article 3, zoning map. So the areas that are proposed here for change, the first map is looking at,
I like your colors, by the way, this time.
Oh, great. I'll let Peter know. Peter Parker did the map this time.
You just made somebody's day.
You did. He's not here, but we'll let him know.
I like these colors better than the orange.
All right. Well, we will bear that in mind.
Can I say I'm a blue person? Can you guess?
So the first change as we head from downtown headed east is 717 Lisbon Street rear here. So that's proposed to go from Neighborhood Conservation A to Urban Enterprise. It is currently used in a more kind of industrial, commercial way. So that was the reason for that proposal.
Which parcel was that? 717?
717 Lisbon Street rear, yep. We can look a little bit more specifically if you want at actually what, it's a warehouse and distribution facility is what we currently have.
I was trying to figure out how close to town was the first property.
How close what, Michael?
Where you were starting on Lisbon Street.
Oh, okay, yep.
Well, so how far west, I guess?
Yeah, so here's the corner with Canal Street and Lisbon Street.
Down to up.
So right kind of here.
Right there, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Starting at the bottom of these maps.
I don't want to miss the one that I want to talk about.
Okay, we'll make sure we hit that. Great. So then the next rezone is adjacent to that. So it would be taking the parcels along Garnet Avenue here. So these little parcels back here, these three, and those further to the south. And then those fronting Thompson Street as well as Lisbon Street. So essentially, if you draw a line like this and come down, so taking those out of Neighborhood Conservation A, putting them in Neighborhood Conservation B, which allows some commercial uses where A does not. It also allows 3-family and greater, which A does not. So it allows greater density of residential and some additional commercial uses. And then the discussion was to rezone down into the Sand Hill neighborhood here as well to NCB. And this is an anomaly, I believe. This zoning line here makes sense that it might follow the property lines here and have all those parcels be zoned similarly. So that's the next set of proposals. And in that case, it would be taking those actually out of community business and putting them in NCB. So that would be a little bit lesser commercial zoning. So it's kind of a little bit of a reverse. Moving further along on the map, looking at the current Martell School site,
You've hit it.
which you're familiar with, and the adjacent parcels here, and taking those three and moving the community business zoning line, which currently goes like this, to include those three parcels. So the zoning line would now do this. So it's taking Martell School, which is in office residential, into community business, and these two parcels that are in Neighborhood Conservation A and putting them in community business.
I'm not in favor of that at this time.
I'm sorry, not doing what?
I'm not in favor of that at this time.
Okay.
Because with recent developments and with this on tonight's agenda, which is surprising, and if it had been on an agenda a couple of months ago, no, we could have some very unintended consequences, because that would have intensified the uses on that property, and current actions speak to being in the dark about future plans, depending on how that issue transpired. And it's not complete yet. And I would posit that we leave it OR until such time as the Martell School issue is dealt with. It could be a contract zone, or it might not be. Maybe at a later time, it might make sense to change the zoning. This time, I'm not in favor of it.
Can you zone this out enough so that we can see where else there's OR zoned in that area? Because on these maps, it's the only OR.
Yeah, it is kind of strange how it cuts down through there to Lisbon Street. It's a little unusual, especially when you look at kind of the relationship of some of these parcels to each other.
Like half of Shaw's is OR?
Yes.
Am I reading that right?
You are.
Just the front half where the flowers are and the
I
produce?
suspect that was historical, because you got 156
Yeah.
East Avenue, which is the high school.
Yeah,
You
so,
had Martell School, and where Shaw's is, it used to be just a field.
Yeah.
So it was to keep the lines consistently down East Avenue. It probably wasn't taken up at the time that Shaw's went in, so it splits the parcel.
and Shanna, so the yellow here, where it says CB, and the red lines show that the Shaw's is a contract zone, and that essentially the uses are community business that contract zone allows. So that parcels, the group of parcels are really treated as community business, essentially. Okay, so moving forward, the last change proposed on this particular group of maps is right along here, starting, it essentially is pulling the line back, just one parcel deep in some areas, half a parcel where something is, let's say, split zoned. Like this parcel, for example, is currently split zoned, so it pulls it back to have the entire parcel be within that community business zoning district. So a number of single parcels along here would be rezoned from NCA to CB. I will say that I believe, without exception, and I'll speak to the exception in just a minute, all of the residents who called me in these neighborhoods, there were some people down on the Thompson Street, kind of behind there, Arkwright, some neighbors, people in the Prospect Avenue, Summit Avenue, Rosedale Avenue who called. Generally speaking, we're in favor of the idea of there being additional uses allowed for parcels along Lisbon Street. So when they found out their taxes weren't going to increase, people were generally fine with that. There was one exception, and she called this afternoon, and when I called, she wasn't available, so we didn't get a chance to actually speak in person.
About taxes.
Well, about whatever her concern was. So Louise Collins called, and she left me 2 voicemails. The first one was to say she had comments about it. Could I talk to her before tonight? And then the second one was that she is not in favor of having her particular parcel rezoned from NCA to CB. So without having, sorry?
What's your parcel?
She's got it up.
I'm sorry.
130 Rosedale Street right there. So without being able to speak with her, I don't know why she was not in favor.
What's the business on Lisbon Street in front of her?
In front of her, let's see.
That's going to be a marijuana store, I believe. That's the old Napa.
It's the
Okay,
old
Old
Napa.
Napa.
The old
Thank
Napa.
you.
Yeah, it's been approved for a marijuana store.
So that's what I have for information on this particular map that you're looking at, which is zoning area A. We've listed all the parcels that are proposed for rezone. I don't know, as a board, how you would like to
We'll do
do
one
this. You
map
want
at
to
a
do
time.
it one at a time?
I
Okay.
think because I'd like to open it up to the public and let the public speak, and if this is their section.
Absolutely. And actually, before you do that, if the board is interested in knowing different uses for OR versus CB or NCA versus CB related to that Martell group of parcels, staff would be happy to pull that information up.
Just anecdotally, a few years ago, 2019, somewhere, probably in my bag tonight, I do have a copy of that planning board minutes, where they were voting on the disposition of Martell School, and one of the planning board members asked, I thought it might have been a separate motion, but it appears to be just something that came up during that discussion, if the board was inclined to change the zoning of Martell School, or 8860 Lisbon Street. The question was, if we change it, could somebody by a matter of right put up a dollar-type store? And the answer was yes. And the person sat back and said, well, I'm opposed to it. I thought it was actually a rezoning, but it appears to be part of the disposition of the property. There was a motion for approving the disposition, and in the recommendations, it said that the feeling of the board was not to rezone it. And that was 2019. And that was the lead up to the first RFP on that property. And the RFPs were opened probably later in 2019, early 2020. And that's why I come back to it. And without knowing what somebody's plans are for that property, I don't feel comfortable changing the zoning, because if somebody acquires ownership and didn't have a covenant with the city as to how to acquire it, anything could be done that fits community business. And obviously, putting up another little mini mall would fit. And that's what I'm opposed to at this point. We need to find out what's going to happen with the issue that we just experienced before moving forward.
Okay.
And I don't think that's much of an ask. No, we can always revisit this down the road, but now's not the time.
Okay. Anybody else on the board have any questions or comments? Okay, in this case, I will open it up to the public. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this section? Okay, you need to go to the podium and put a sign and identify yourself with your name and your, please. Yeah, over there, because there's a microphone, because this meeting is recorded, and we need to be able to hear you so that if it's recorded, people can hear you. Okay? Your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, Paul Plord, live at 751 Lisbon Street. It's on the corner of Lisbon Street and Sand Hill. Our property sits back a little bit more on Sand Hill than it does on Lisbon Street. You guys have rezoned the area, and we're just looking for information on the difference between what it was to what it is now. You guys changing it. I mean, is there more restrictions, less restrictions, taxes going up, taxes going down?
I think staff prepared an answer for you today. I don't know if we can pause and let, she had offered earlier, we didn't need it.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Shelley, if
Yeah.
you would address,
So I can speak on.
Excuse me, my hearing's not that great. This for me is like an echo chamber. So I really don't hear that well in here.
All right, let's see if you can see my face, maybe that will help. So I'll speak first on taxes. The way that your property is taxed is based on how you currently use it and also the square footage of your building or structures. So if you continue to use your property as a single-family home, let's say, the zoning doesn't impact your taxes, it's how you're using it.
Okay, because it's just a single-family home.
Yep, yeah,
That's all it
so
is.
that won't be a change. It would only be if you changed your use, so if the single-family home became a, professional office or something, then the
that wouldn't have
taxes would be
happened.
different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that handles the tax question. So which specific property are you at, sir?
what's your address?
Which property?
751 Lisbon Street. It's on the corner of Sand Hill and Lisbon Street. Just further back on the Sand Hill part of it.
NCA to NCB.
Okay, yes. So the NCA only, it's very limited. It pretty much allows single family. With NCB, there could be multiple units. So you could do like a 3-unit or more dwelling units in a structure. There are limitations for, based on lot size, how many units you can have. So there are some limitations there. And based on what's in the neighborhood. So NCB is a little unusual in how we calculate that, but it would be related to the neighborhood. That particular neighborhood, you know, there are some multifamilies along Lisbon, but then mostly it's all single family on Sand Hill, so there would be some limitations there. There are some commercial uses that are allowed, and I can just pull those up real quick if folks will be patient.
Sure. So the NCB zone allows uses, commercial uses. Allows for, let's see, neighborhood retail stores, which are under 5,000 square feet, basically like a grocery store, like a
Yeah.
small deli. But under 5,000 square feet, and no, I believe, no liquor is allowed.
To be consumed on site. You can sell it, but not consume it there.
What else? It allows for personal services, something like a spa or a nail salon, I believe. Hair stylist, personal services like that. And lastly, I mean, those are the three, well, there's one more. I mean, if you want to put an arts and crafts studio, that's a conditional use, so it's a possibility. Those are the three main ones that are sticking
And
out for.
offices.
And
If you go higher up, there's professional and business office. So office uses would be allowed. So like a business office, an attorney's office.
You could have an office.
Yes, yep, you could.
I mean, not that I want one, but.
Right. And then the other thing I think that would be allowed with that is what we call a mixed-use structure. So for example, if someone wanted to do an office on the first floor and then live upstairs or have like a couple apartments upstairs, that would be allowed. So because part of the intent behind rezoning would be allowing some of those properties on Lisbon Street greater flexibility, right, that are single-family homes now. Maybe maybe it's going to be hard to find a buyer someday to use it still as a single-family home. People might want greater flexibility for how those properties are used. So having some commercial uses, still allow residential, or allow it to convert to multiple units. So that's kind of from the planning side, our sort of thought process as staff for making this recommendation. So bring it back to.
Okay, does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're all set then, all right. Anyone else want to make any comments or questions about this section of Lisbon Street? Okay, in that case, I will close it to the public and I will bring it back to the board. And we know how Mr. Marcotte feels about the
860 Lisbon
860
Street.
Lisbon Street.
I do have something additional.
Okay, sure.
I was just looking at this as we were discussing Sand Hill Road and that area. So if offices were going to be allowed on the Androscoggin Avenue side of Lisbon Street, going to have to access that through going to Thompson Street, correct? I mean, you wouldn't be able to do that from Lisbon Street because you got that hill.
Right.
TD's right there.
Well, yeah, but it's the section, he's talking about the section
Yeah,
of
the
the hill.
blue section.
where the-
TD is right across the blue into the purple.
Yeah, about where the M is on Thompson, there's a pretty steep hill, and the grade of Lisbon Street is maybe 2 stories
Oh,
lower.
at least, yeah.
Lower than the big
Right.
bottom floor.
But if somebody did want to convert their property or sell it to somebody who wants to turn it into a neighborhood,
Right, but we've got Thompson Street as being NCB as well. The street, we've included the street.
yeah. No,
So that it would allow for them to drive on Androscoggin.
Yeah, they'd have to drive on to Androscoggin,
Right,
take a
and-
left if they're coming from Lisbon Street.
Right,
and,
right, come. come from
And
the
you're
back.
impacting all the neighbors on Hall Street, and,
Mhm.
because that's one parcel deep, I believe, between Hall and Thompson.
Yep.
Do we know if the buildings, the parcels in between Hall and Thompson, if they are oriented towards Hall or if they're oriented towards Thompson Street?
Probably Hall, well, most of them, you can see driveways, most of them are Hall Street, but there is one towards the middle that's Thompson.
Well,
Yeah.
may I?
Yes, please.
Couldn't agree more, but realistically, if I'm the owner or I'm the developer who's looking to develop and/or purchase and then develop one of these newly NCB blue zones, and this is where we go back to like careful on regulation and free market, but if I'm purchasing that for something more than my home CPA business, in which the one client every 2 hours coming through Androscoggin and Thompson is fine, but I'm like banking on the visibility that Lisbon Street gives me, it's because I've invested money and found a way to bring some access from the front of the property, probably pedestrian.
I just, no. No, I'm not opposed here, I'm just saying that, take a look at it now, don't want unintended consequences, don't want to have an Atwood Street episode.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But I'm okay with this NCA to NCB.
Okay.
It's just 860
Right.
Lisbon Street.
Josh?
Just on that, Mike, one of the things to think about, I think a lot of these are already non-conforming use for NCA anyway, and this was kind of a step to try to make some of this.
them non-conforming?
There are multiple,
Multi-units. and I
Yeah,
think
some
they
of
are.
them are, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Just
NCA
trying to
is a
make
better
them,
fit, I think.
make them more conforming
Yeah,
than they
exactly.
are now.
For some reason, the corner lot is already CB, contract zone.
But
Yes.
That's,
Let's see.
that's
what
the
is
bank.
No, across from the bank.
It's 4 to 8 unit apartment building, it says.
4 to 8, and
Yeah.
that's why they needed the up to a CB, because
Yeah.
it was the number of units.
Right.
It was a terrible contract zone. I can remember the guy, he wanted to do some type of mixed use there. He wanted to do some type of non-residential use there.
It's a rather large and awkward-looking structure, I know that.
This whole process, after we had the workshop with the council, we kind of looked to see if there was any non-residential use there any longer, and there isn't. So technically, the way that contract zones are written is that if that use is ever abandoned, it reverts back to the underlying zoning district. So technically, unless they want to keep that community business, it should really be reverting back to NCA, and as a result of this action here, would turn into NCB as well. We've had a handful of contract zones over the years where the use has since moved on.
Right.
And so we basically get a letter from the property owner, we record it at the registry, because all contract zones get recorded at the registry, basically saying it's reverted back to the underlying zone.
Okay.
So that's something we should probably revisit, because I don't even think it's owned by the same people who pursued that contract zone. And yeah.
Right, okay. Okay, Alex?
Just looking, I went on Google and looked at the street view for Thompson Street, and yeah, it's basically all of the other buildings on the, what is that?
Hall.
Northern, yeah, between it and Hall.
I don't know
They're-
directions.
They're all oriented towards Hall. It's all backyards and fences, so it's pretty much a service lane at this point.
Right.
Both for the buildings that face Lisbon Street, it's all garages back there, and for the buildings on Hall, so.
So it's not a big deal. Okay, so in that case, we've had comments. Any other comments and questions? Okay, so I would entertain a motion.
For just map A.
I'm sorry?
For just map A.
Just map A, yeah, we're gonna do
Remove 860.
I can make the motion to accept it as presented, and then you can have that in discussion.
you can amend it.
Or you can make a motion.
I can make the motion.
Okay, then go ahead.
Wasn't prepared to, but. Okay. And we're doing just map A.
Yep.
So I make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Article 17, Section 5 of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for amendments to Appendix A, Zoning and Land Use Code,
Sorry, skip over to Article 3.
okay, Appendix A, still say Zoning and Land Use Code, Article 3.
Official
the
map.
Official map A, with the exception of 860 Lisbon Street. And that's where we start, because the other things are different articles.
Okay. Do we have a second? Roger will second that. Do we have any further discussion?
I just want to make sure that,
Yep.
So the motion I made, make sure that I did it right, and Roger seconded, is to pull 860 on Lisbon Street from being rezoned. It'll remain OR in this motion.
Yes, and so that's this parcel here.
Okay.
And then these two parcels that are currently Marston Investment Group would still remain in the rezoning.
Right. It's just 860.
Okay.
It's just 860.
Okay. And everybody's in agreement? Okay. No more further discussion. Roger Dupree.
Yes.
Joshua Najin.
Yes.
Michael Marcotte.
Yes.
Shanna Cox.
Yes.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
Amy Smith.
Yes.
Lucy Bisson, yes. Okay. So map A is done.
Can I just add a comment for the record?
Absolutely.
Happy to support that motion. Happy for any developer to come forward with a contract rezone request.
Yes.
And I think it's an important message as we support economic development to say, I think what you've heard here today is the expression of interest in knowing how it will be used, given that it's a pivotal property, and not the rejection of economic development in general. And I'd like
Absolutely.
the record to show that.
Absolutely.
And Shannon, thank you for that. And I'd like to see it in the minutes, because not everything we say is in the minutes.
No.
There are times it's not certain comments
Just a
that we make.
discussion,
No,
yeah.
it should be, because when you go back and read the minutes years later, as I tried to do with the 2019 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was at that meeting, and I got quoted, and I said, oh, look, I was at that meeting. And favoring the disposition of the property, as a matter of fact. But it was a different time and different set of parameters. There was once upon a time the planning board the minutes used to reflect almost everything, almost like a dictation. We don't need that, but
Yeah.
but our sentiment needs to be in there so that if somebody's looking back for a reference point, they understand why the board did what it did.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Area B. Oh, is this like Area 51?
All right.
I only see two small changes
Yeah.
on that one.
Area B is much smaller than Area A. So it is essentially two parcels that would be rezoned, and they are both on Scribner Boulevard. 18 Scribner Boulevard would go from being NCA to community business. That's the one in purple. And 15 Scribner Boulevard would go from NCA to highway business. That's in red.
Can you remind us why for these two?
Honestly, I think the discussion was really just squaring up that corner. I think that was a recommendation from one of the council members when we had our workshop.
Yeah, I think it's because it took some of these parcels in and separated them. Because like the NCHB is behind the Dunkin' Donuts,
Yeah, actually, let me get to the map. That will probably help.
and the other one is just a big.
So were
apartment
both of
building.
these parcels were split?
I don't believe they're split,
not.
but I think the thought was,
I think it's more to like bring this
Square it
line
off.
down.
yeah, to square it
Yeah,
off.
it does look like geometry.
So this
But I'm
one-
also wondering, and Dave might remember, is this the property where somebody is trying to sell a lot of lawn mower equipment and such and has run into trouble in the past?
The right neighborhood, I'm not sure if it's that house.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that one or the next one up.
Well, now they'll have a taxable business opportunity.
That's right. We can actually allow it now. I think, on a same vein, the house across the street had a bunch of deer hanging from a tree, so.
Oh, well, that
So
depends
we
on
may
it.
be able to commit a butcher now, so.
Maybe they're just a good shot, David.
Okay.
So really at this point in time, this parcel right here is a single family. It looks like this one is a
So
two-family. So it would really be more about future development opportunities
Yeah,
than
just square
probably
that off.
changing dramatically how things are being done today. And then same thing over here. This one's a single family, and then the L on the corner, it says is a 3-unit. Yeah.
Okay, anybody have any questions, comments? There is no public, so there's no need to open it to the public. And I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make one. I'd like to make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Article 17, Section 5 of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for amendments to Appendix A, Zoning and Land Use Code, Article 3, Official Map, Area B.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Josh? Okay, any further discussion? Roger Dupree?
Yes.
Joshua Najin?
Yes.
Michael Marcotte?
Yes.
Shanna Cox?
Yep.
Christine Kittredge?
Yes.
Amy Smith?
Yes.
Lucy Bisson, yes. Okay,
So Peter went Christmassy on the next one.
yeah.
Sure did.
And, okay, so we're looking at,
Okay, so
Area
Area
C.
C. So this change is really, you can see that there's like a utility corridor that goes between this parcel, which is the rear portion of 11 Dyer Road, and 11 Dyer Road, which is on the other side of it. The thought here is that while that property may continue to stay in the same ownership, it might also be developed as part of a rear portion of those properties along Lisbon Street. So by giving it a highway business zoning, it allows it to have future development opportunity. I believe that was the discussion that took place.
right, Shanna?
Is that a real street or a paper street?
No, it's an
I
electric,
believe it's
it's
utility.
a
Let's-
utility corridor.
Let me get down
It's
there
just a
for you.
utility corridor. So nothing's can be built.
Yeah.
So you might as well throw it on with the Lisbon Street, then leave it.
5 solar panels connected to the utility.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
right,
likely.
that'll be right, that would be good.
Uh-oh, where did I go?
You want to go up further?
Up here? Ah, thank you. Yep,
There you go.
all right, great. So,
There it is.
let's try the aerial photo, that might help us out.
Oh, yeah.
That's behind, like, the animal hospital. That's what it looks like on Google here.
What's the?
Yeah, the pool place, the animal hospital, the health club. Yep,
Oh, excuse me.
It's
Matt
the
and I are
RA,
not
right?
communicating
yeah,
well.
it's RA, and it would be making it HB. Just, oops.
That's a general office.
Yeah, because you've got the utilities corridor.
Is that a single parcel? Did you just pull that up?
Health Club, the Young Men's Christian Association.
Oh, it's just the YMCA that owns it now.
The animal doctor, the YMCA,
That's a
the
pool
pool
place.
company.
That's ABC Pool.
Meredith,
And the
Maine.
snow tubing place is kind of what's to the left there.
Yep.
Can you click in the middle of that section?
I don't know what section.
Maybe you already have.
The RA?
The one in question, yeah.
The RA,
Sure.
right
Yeah,
there.
okay, what comes up then?
I believe this is a single-family house.
Okay, so the person who owns that little, oh, it's not little, I'm looking at the pool.
So it's a single-family house
Official ward.
here,
Okay.
and then that property goes with it.
Basically, they would have access through the
Utility corridor.
utility corridor.
Yeah, but there's no,
Is this just making their whole property?
Actually,
no, it's
only a
just
part
that
of their
corner.
property.
It's just this,
It's just this
it's just
part
this
here,
little
Christine.
part there.
Okay.
The rest would stay rural agriculture.
Hit that parcel again for us. Light up the parcel it's attached to. So that's one parcel that transverses the electrical
Utility
corridor.
corridor, yeah.
That this one person owns down on Dyer Road.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it would essentially be making this person's back part of their own parcel match their front part of their own parcel.
No, we would be
No, no,
split
it
zoning
matches it
them.
now.
It matches
It
it
would,
now.
it would match the stuff on Lisbon Street.
Right. But
It
how
would-
would you access that?
Well, the only way to access it is from
Oh.
Lisbon Street
Yeah.
through one of those properties.
Yeah. I
Because
think
it's
that,
landlocked.
I think the thought was perhaps this parcel being on the other side of the utility line might make sense to be zoned with these parcels for future development.
So-
It
so-
does split zone something that isn't currently split zoned, so I can see why people are kind of questioning that.
So what's adjacent to that parcel? Right
this
Right
side?
there, right where the arrow is.
Marijuana.
Really?
Principal uses primarily commercial, but apparently marijuana.
I'm obviously not familiar with the building, but, no, and
And
it's,
and it's pretty deep back
and it
off the
sits back.
street, yeah,
yeah,
so,
you can't see it from the street. If they wanted to get a little more property, right to the left of their building, looking.
Yeah, they could pick that one
acquire
up,
that.
right.
Do you have an overlay that shows the water resources in that area? I'm noticing there, it looks like there's standing water there.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, any access to that property is cut off, from Dyer Road because of a seasonal stream or wetland or something like that in the utility corridor.
It's all swampy back there.
It is swampy.
Just on the other side of it.
Right.
yeah, so it does look like there might be a federal wetland over here and some back here.
That seems to be pretty dry.
I think
does,
you're
it
gonna,
doesn't
I
seem
think you're gonna find it's actually a hill, so it's not it's not
Yeah, you
a
see the
readily
contours?
developable piece of land necessarily. It's not, to the comment made, the marijuana business or whoever owns that could buy this property and have more land. That's probably a good thought, or expand the depth of any of those other lots on Lisbon. But it also, there you go. I mean, it's almost the high point in that neighborhood.
Right. I'm ambivalent, I don't care.
Yeah, I feel ambivalent.
Looks great. Good hard work done.
Yeah, are we yes or no? Yes or, change it? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion, or any further discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Article 17, Section 5 of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for amendments to Appendix A Zoning and Land Use Code, Article 3 Official Map C? C. Period.
I'll
Do I have a
second.
Oh, Christine will second. Any further discussion? Okay, Roger Dupree.
Oh, Lucy, sorry. Can I
I'm
just
sorry,
add-
okay.
No, just hearing everybody's ambivalent, so I'm just curious, then what are we gaining?
There was a recommendation, and we figured we'd go with the recommendation.
Okay.
Future development opportunities for that woman to sell half of her parcel and deepen those other corridor from Lisbon Street.
I mean, I'll just share full disclosure. I live on Dyer Road, so I'm just conscious of the fact it's one of the last standing rural
Right,
areas in the city, so I just
right,
wanted
but
to say- But I
the-
see where it's
yeah, because
still
of the fact
connected
that
to Lisbon.
it's separated by the utility corridor. The people on Dyer Road are never gonna be able to use it contiguous to the property they have.
There's a lot of snowmobiling and
Oh, I'm
snowshoeing
sure.
back there.
Yeah, but,
I know, I'm just
Right,
throwing
right.
it out there. It's
No,
one of
no,
the
I
last
understand.
standing rural parts of
I-
the city, but I see the
Yep.
connection to Lisbon Street, so
okay.
trying to not be
NIMBY.
biased.
Roger Dupree,
Yes.
Joshua Najin,
Yes.
Michael Marcotte.
Yes.
Shanna Cox.
Yes.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
Amy Smith.
Yes.
Lucy Bisson, yes. Okay, so we're done with that. Now,
Conformance.
now we are talking about nonconformance. Tell us about nonconformance.
Do you want to take a crack? Okay.
So we've made changes to 3 sections in Article 6. Section 2, non-conforming lots. Revise and add clarifying language defining when a non-conforming lot can be developed. when it can be divided, and when it must be merged with neighboring lots in common ownership. Should I talk about section? I think I keep going, right?
Yeah, I keep going.
Yeah.
So section 3, non-conforming structures, revise and add clarifying language defining when a non-conforming structure can be rebuilt. And section 4, non-conforming uses, add language defining when an accessory dwelling unit may be built on a lot with a non-conforming use. Also revise and add clarifying language defining when a non-conforming use can be rebuilt.
Okay, my only comment is in section 3C, you need a comma after flood and between flood and lightning, because it's flood lightning. It's,
lightning. Ooh, I
and
like
I
that.
read it everywhere else, it's got the comma, it's just that particular place.
Interesting.
So I thought it might, before it goes
Flood lightning
into
sounds
the.
scary.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Well, flood lightning, might be interesting, but who knows? Anyways, okay, any other further questions or comments by the board?
No, if
You
one
could-
were to, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you could throw in an Oxford comma right before that, or.
Well,
Just.
As well as doing something to separate flood and lightning.
Yes.
okay, all right, well,
Wait, which or? What's going on?
Nothing.
In
Nothing.
section C still?
yeah,
Unless you want to.
Was that a real statement, Alex? Okay.
Yes,
Can
it
you-
was actually.
Can you repeat that for us?
So you could add an Oxford comma in before the or in that same statement. So it would read flood, comma, lightning, comma, wind, comma, structural failure, comma, or any other cause.
Ah, thank you. I wasn't
Okay.
sure which or, so that's great.
all right. Okay, nope, there is no public, so there's no point in going to the public.
No.
Any further discussion by the board?
If one were to make a motion to accept the nonconformances as
Please.
presented and amended in discussion, does it cover our commas?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay,
Those are more typo things that we'll address.
In case anyone else wants to make a motion, that's what they're.
okay,
I'll do it.
Do it.
sure, go ahead, Christine.
I will make a motion pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Article 17, Section 5 of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for amendments to Appendix A Zoning and Land Use Code, Article 6, Nonconformance, with the comments as amended.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, and any further discussions, comments? All right, Roger
Yes.
Dupree, Joshua Najin,
Yes.
Michael Marcotte.
Yes.
Shanna Cox.
Yes.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
Amy Smith.
Yes.
Lucy Bisson, yes. Okay, next one, district regulations.
Great, okay.
I gotta find it. Oh, here we go. Okay. Section 22, land use requirements, land use table. We removed and replaced in-law apartments with accessory dwelling units. We added, add permitted zones for accessory dwelling units and expand zones for home occupations.
And this just aligns with our definitions that we talked about earlier, right?
Yes, so, let's see here. Right, so by, removing in-law apartments, replacing that with accessory dwelling units, we needed to create, rules around ADUs. So we added permitted zones and home occupations. I think that's trying to be consistent with the changes we made with the definitions, allowing one additional person, trying to be more flexible in general with home occupations.
And we've actually had people in the downtown we've had to tell can't have a home occupation out of their apartment, which when you can have a retail business in the same district seems like a crazy thing to state. So that's clarifying that so that staff doesn't have to say stupid things to people. Sorry.
Well said, well said.
Okay. Okay. All right, so we're doing just Article 11, or
Yeah.
are we doing both 11 and 12? Because he talked about in-law apartments, too.
Yeah, that might make sense for the board to take them together.
Okay.
David just pointed out that we do have in home occupations on the chart under urban enterprise right now, it's a conditional use permit, and maybe we want to just make it permitted. So the board may want to ask staff to change that, or you may want to keep it conditional use.
I think it should be permitted everywhere. If it's going to be permitted everywhere, so, okay.
I do have a
Michael?
question. Shelley mentioned saying no to downtown residents, what, on the first floor of an apartment? Is that how you put it?
Anybody who has a dwelling unit down.
Yeah,
It cannot do it?
so,
Would this allow it?
right, so any of these that have an underline under it are
Uh-huh.
zones where we're proposing that it be added where currently it's not allowed. So if you are in the institutional office and you have a residence, you can't have a home occupation. If you're in the riverfront, let's say you were to live in an apartment down in the riverfront or a condo, you wouldn't be able to have a home occupation. Highway business.
Currently or going forward?
No, currently.
Currently, yeah, so we're adding all these zones.
We're adding,
that you
okay.
can now have a home
Because
business where
it
you
was a
currently
subject
can't.
that came up a few years back at some other function in the Callahan Hall. Someone spoke with me about it, and my mom can't do like a little sewing something. I think she lived downtown, and I couldn't see why not. I didn't pursue it as something here on the planning board. I don't know if I was on the planning board at the time or what, but I've always been in favor of that, so
Okay.
good job on this.
Okay, anybody else have any comments or questions? No, since there is, yes.
It's just to make sure that we're asking staff to do what we've just been suggested, like that's clear. Are you clear on please do?
The conditional use permit, make that permitted.
Make
in
that
the
permanent,
urban
correct.
enterprise? Yep.
I mean,
got that noted.
permitted, not,
Just wanted to
Yep.
yeah,
close that loop.
yes, definitely. Okay, no public, so no public hearing, and I'll entertain a motion for Articles 11 and 12
Did we cover
together.
12?
Oh, wait, we haven't talked 12 yet. Do you want to do it together? Because if you do,
Oh,
I'd be
okay,
happy to talk
well,
about
he
12.
mentioned in-law apartments and stuff, so,
Yes.
okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the main change to Article 12 performance standards is Section 11 is currently in-law apartment standards, and we are replacing that entirely with accessory dwelling unit.
Right.
And so staff met code enforcement and planning and looked at actually what a number of other communities have done, looked at the state law that was passed that we need to come into compliance this summer with. A number of what communities had done, they'd adopted before the state law, but it was still really helpful to compare and look at that. And we also wanted to make sure that what you can currently do as an in-law apartment, we weren't changing that drastically, like making an ADU a lot smaller, so your in-law apartment is now, non-conforming. So I'll go through what we came up with. So this is a merger of making sure we comply with LD 2003, which is the state requirements, but also keeping it somewhat similar to what Lewiston had. And I should back up. The main reason for this change right now, an in-law apartment can only be used by a family member. It can't be rented, right? So that's what we currently allow unless you're actually a two-family, like a proper duplex. If you're an in-law attached to a single family, then it has to be a family member that lives in one of those two structures, or in both structures, rather, and it has to be attached. Okay, so with an ADU, the major changes would be it can be rented. It doesn't have to be lived in by a family member. It can be detached or attached. So it could be a small building somewhere else on the property instead of attached to your unit. It can still be attached. It can be above your garage. It can be your basement. It can be, you know, next to the unit, within the unit, however people do that. So we also wanted to make it, the state law requires that any single family can have an in-law. We're stating here that any single family or a mobile home could have an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay.
So either of those two uses, which are very similar in how they function, could be allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit. Since it can be detached, then certainly it you know, could work for a mobile home. And we've also, for the purposes of this, stated that, and these is related to the state law, that you don't need additional frontage to your parcel or lot size to have an accessory dwelling unit. In addition, the accessory dwelling unit doesn't count against or towards that net lot area per dwelling unit. So this is where we get into like, why would you have an ADU versus why would you build like a two-family or have a duplex type structure? And really, if you have a two-family, you have to meet the lot size per dwelling unit. We have a number of lots that require you to have additional frontage, to have additional lot size. The accessory dwelling unit, which is meant to be accessory in nature, does not require those things. Okay. And you'll remember when we talked nonconformance, we also put in that language that if you have a nonconforming, let's say single family or mobile home on a lot, so let's say the lot is undersized or it doesn't have enough frontage, we've stated that you can still have an accessory dwelling unit allowed on that lot.
Okay.
Okay, so we've taken out the in-law requirements. You know, you'll see those bits that are crossed out. We've stated that it's clearly accessory to the use as a single-family dwelling and that you can only have one ADU. So the state law requires us to allow at least one, but we don't have to allow more. So we allowed one in-law, so we're allowing one ADU. That's how staff has written it, to be created on one lot, essentially. The ADU, currently we had language number 2 down here that the in-law apartment wouldn't alter the single-family character of the property. So we've kept that, and then we've changed some of the standards for how that would be met. So the first one, A, we're stating that the principal dwelling, so whether it was a single family, and essentially it wouldn't be relevant for a mobile home because we're saying where it's attached. So for a single family, where it's attached to the single family, there can only be one main entrance on the front of the building. If you have 2 main entrances, you basically look like a two-family, right? So we want the ADU to maintain the single-family character. The other entrances must be designed to appear subordinate. We think that's clear enough language that the board and staff can figure out what that means and can also tell the applicant, you know, what you've designed, they look identical. You need to do something. So one's bigger, one's more prominent, you know, something's clear that the other is subordinate. We had language where you had to, we were limiting what an in-law apartment would require for a driveway. So here we're just stating that you need to share the same driveway opening. So we're not gonna have 2 different driveways, one for your ADU and one for your single family. And that, similar to what it said for in-law, that you can't expand that driveway more than 24 feet wide, which is really huge, but we actually don't have standards otherwise for how wide your driveway can be. We've kept the requirement that it not exceed 900 square feet, which was the requirement for an in-law, and that it be limited to 2 bedrooms. So we think that that continues to keep it accessory in nature if it's limited to 2 bedrooms in a certain size. We looked at alternatives to a numerical size, but since in-law was 900, we felt that keeping it the same made sense. So like I said, we don't end up with a lot of non-conforming properties that used to be conforming. The state law requires that an ADU must be a minimum of 190 square feet, which is why that's in there. If you look at our definition of dwelling unit for Lewiston, it's greater than that, but because this is an accessory structure and because of the state law, we've put that in there to make sure we comply. And then finally, D, we've talked about where the placement of that detached ADU would be. So we don't really want it right in front of the house. We want it tucked to the side or rear. But we did put a requirement, or an exception almost in here, thinking about something like the rural agricultural zone or low-density residential, where someone might have a fairly large lot, their house may be set really far back from the road. We don't want to require that the ADU also be 200 feet back or whatever. So we've said an exception where the principal dwelling is on a lot that's in excess of 1 acre, and it's set back at least 2 times the required front setback. The ADU can be placed closer so long as it meets the setback. So we're hopeful that that solves a potential problem and seems reasonable to staff, so kind of up to you whether that sounds reasonable to you. We had a provision that the one of the 2 units, in-law or single-family, had to be owner-occupied. We are keeping that, so either the ADU or the principal dwelling has to be owner-occupied, but we are not specifying who lives in the other one. It can be rented. It doesn't have to be a family member. And that's another difference between that and a 2-family. A 2-family doesn't have that requirement. It can be an income property where you rent out both.
Love number 6, that's great.
Number 6, that is state requirement. So there's no, we actually can't regulate that. That's required, so that's why that's in there. And then we'll get to in just a second. And then number 7, we didn't want to run a situation where somebody tries to divide off their ADU and sell it. The whole point is it's accessory to the principal structure. It should stay on the same lot. It should all be in one ownership. You shouldn't be able to condo out your ADU and sell that building, let's say. So that's that requirement. And since that is a requirement that stay in common ownership, the in-law apartment used to have to be registered at the, filed at the Registry of Deeds. It makes sense your ADU would be as well, so we have somewhere to point to say it has to be common ownership, and someone looking to buy or sell would have that trigger and would know that. So, sorry, that's a little wordy, but that's kind of, that's where we landed. Josh, did you have a question?
I just had a question about number 6 says no additional parking is required for the ADU, but the 2B was stating that any newer expanded entrance. I'm sorry, I read that as if, never mind, it's crossed out. Forget it. Now I see it. Provisions for 1 additional parking space.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Amazing what happens when you read it, huh?
Yeah, when you read the crossed out and underlined. Okay, anybody else have any other, Shanna?
I just have a brief one.
Yep.
How far are we from being done with the implementation of 2003 before this summer?
This is the first step, ADUs. So this is the first one we've brought to you. It gets hairier from here, but this one seemed relatively straightforward, and in-law apartments have constantly been a challenge for staff and residents. So this solves an existing problem that Lewiston was having and brings us into compliance. So where are we on the other items? We aren't there yet. We're hoping late spring that will be coming to you. We might not hit that July 1st deadline, but we do hope to be hitting it this summer. There's nothing in the law that says what happens if you don't hit it, and there's really no, no mechanism in place. If we're like a month or two late, nothing's gonna happen. They also have just put out the draft rules, and next week, the three of us will be sitting in on the Zoom public hearing for that, and they're taking public comment through part of March. So it's still, while we read the rules and we said, okay, we think nothing great is changing with ADUs for that, the state is still coming up to speed on this, even though it's supposed to be implemented by this summer. So we feel comfortable as staff that our timing is fine, I guess.
I mean, there's a chance that even with the ADUs, which, to Shelley's point, we should be doing anyway, the state rules might say something different, and we might have to come back to you folks and make a change.
Right, okay. Josh?
I just had a question about, why did you decide on 190 to 900 square feet? Just,
Okay.
was that random, or was there a reason?
Yeah, good question. So the 190 is in the state law, and it says that the municipality can pick a maximum. So you don't have to have a maximum, but you can. It doesn't tell you what the maximum would be. So some communities use it as like a % of your single-family home. So let's say you have a 2,000 square foot single-family home, and you can have, I don't know, 75%, whatever that was. Sorry, my math is terrible. Whatever that is. So some do it that way. Some do it just based on the number of bedrooms. Some do it on a combination, the greater of the an actual numeric number, like 1,000 square feet or 850 or 700, or the % of your house. We didn't want to do anything too complicated. So since the in-law apartments in Lewiston were capped at 900 square feet, we kind of went back and forth and looked at doing like a 75% of your, so we felt it was easier if we say to Joe homeowner who has a house, you need to show us what your square footage is that's habitable. How do you figure that out? How do we as staff figure out that you gave us the right number so we can figure out what the percentage is based on? So we felt like the percentage was going to be a problem in implementation. So we felt like it was easier to pick an actual number that's not based on the size of your house. 900, since we already had that as an in-law, we didn't want to come back and say it was 800, and then we have a number of in-law apartments that are not in conformance. We have about 110, I believe, is what the assessor sent me, that are legal, like on record. We know there's a bunch of others probably. So that was our thought process, and we felt like 900 was still going to be accessory to most structures. There might be that 800 square foot house or 900 square foot house out there that a 900 square foot accessory dwelling unit wouldn't be as accessory to, but we didn't feel like that was a real problem, I guess, as stuff. So that was where we landed. If folks want to open up discussion as to a different way to go forward, we certainly could, but that was where we landed with this, and why we ended up with the 190. We have to, the 900, we wanted to pick a number. So if you have a 1,200 square foot home and there's no max, you could build a 2,000 square foot ADU. Well, how is that accessory? So that we felt it was important to have a maximum.
Completely understood. I'm thinking about the homes that are 5,000 square feet. So, I mean, my home is 2,700 square feet.
Yeah.
So, it's a 900 square foot accessory. Thinking about an in-law apartment versus an accessory dwelling unit, which could be a rentable property, is...
Well, yeah, but you still, in 900 square feet, I mean, I have that in my home, and I have 2 bedrooms and, living room, kitchen, and it's quite large. And, I was part of the planning board when we were discussing the in-law apartments and the max, and, people were going on like, well, they should have 1,500 square feet, and I'm going, most of these people are going to be alone, even if it's 2-bedroom. I've got a 2-bedroom house, and I've got a big house. And it's less than, so that's where we had come up with the 900 square feet, that 900 for an in-law or an ADU, I think is fine.
And prior to that change, Lucy, we didn't have a cap, and part of the reason we did that is we had two projects. I think one of them is on Stone Ledge Drive, or that subdivision by Drill and Hardware, where it was an in-law apartment. It was basically a ranch attached to a ranch, and the neighborhood was all upset because they said, this looks and feels like a two-family. It doesn't look like an in-law apartment. And that's literally what the guy did, is he had his house plan, and he just attached another house to his house plan.
Yeah.
So we came up with a cap at that time. To Shelley's point, whether or not 900 is the magic number or not, you know, that can be up for discussion, but that's how we landed somewhere.
Right.
It's 3 tiny homes.
It is
Right.
3 tiny homes.
Yeah.
And actually, Josh, this may help you too. So when we start implementing the rest of LD 2003, there are provisions that if somebody wanted, if they had enough space, so you have to have a big enough lot, so you have the area for the amount of space per dwelling unit. An existing single-family home can add either 1 dwelling unit or 2, depending upon location, and that is a dwelling unit. It's not an accessory dwelling unit. So that's a single family becoming a 2-family or becoming a 3-family, and at that point, there is no cap on size. And there, depending upon how we do it, there might not be a limitation on, you know, the driveway situation, right? It wouldn't have to be clearly a subordinate or accessory, so you could have, you know, multiple entrances. There are provisions for it to be allowed to be detached or attached. So again, a lot of flexibility there, but we can require that you have the larger lot size and all of those things. So I think that it won't work for all parcels. We have a lot of smaller parcels in the city, but if that's the case, if it's already a small parcel, then it makes sense we're requiring something accessory and small as opposed to a big.
Yeah, that all makes sense. This isn't a hill I'm gonna die on. I'm fine with 900 square feet, so.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, since there is no public, we'll not open it to the public, I will entertain a motion for Article 11 and 12 together.
I'll make a motion
Thank you.
pursuant to Article 7, Section 4, and Article 17, Section 5 of the Zoning and Land Use Code to send a favorable recommendation to the City Council for amendments to Appendix A, Zoning and Land Use Code, Article 11, District Regulations,
Yes,
the one we just did,
yes,
and 12, Performance Standards, because we did both.
yes, we did both. Do I have a second? Roger? Any further comments, questions? Roger Dupree.
Yes.
Joshua Najin.
Yes.
Michael Marcotte.
An unenthusiastic yes.
Shanna Cox.
Yep.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
Amy Smith.
Yes.
And Lucy Bisson, yes. Okay, now we've got Design Lewiston Site Plan Review and Design Guidelines Standards. The pictures.
Okay. So we've given you 2 pages out of the citywide design guidelines. I will say that there are portions of the Design Lewiston overlay in the overlay, how do we refer to that? The Design District overlay, yes. The Design District overlay. There are some requirements for buffers. So while this says it's design guidelines and they're citywide, there are times when we specify you have to build a buffer like X from here. So it actually is sometimes a guideline and sometimes a standard. So I just want to make that distinction because it is important as we talk about this. So in the time I've been with you, we've had a couple of projects where there's been discussion about minimum tree size for buffers and that sort of thing. And then David and I have talked a little bit about buffers back and forth, and this was one of our bucket items that you and the council had talked about, was improving our buffer standards. So what we have done here is, as we read the buffer design on page 9, the second half there, it was a little unclear, well, it wasn't 100% clear how you might apply this, in that when you get to the second page, there's these wonderful graphics, and when you look at that, it makes the suggestion that if you have a fence, you would also have planting to go with, right? That it wouldn't just be a 6-foot fence is your buffer. That's, sufficient. And when you get to that first page buffer design, at the top it talks about it should consist of one or more of the following. So I added language that at a minimum the buffers should consist of one or more of the following approaches, just to make it clear, I guess it clearer in my mind that you're picking one or more of these and you're adhering to it. It's not, I'll do a little bit of this, I'll do a little bit of that, but it's like you're doing exactly what's in the bullet, and if you want to do more, you can. The second change is looking at the first bullet there, evergreen screening. In a way, I like the language we had, should be effective to a minimum height of 4 feet. So if you think about how a tree is structured, the top foot or two isn't necessarily providing you with a lot of visual screening. However, 4 feet is pretty low. So I think that the board, there's been a little bit of a challenge maybe for the board to turn to an applicant and say, well, our standard, our guideline says 4 feet, but we want you to do 6 feet. We want something that actually provides some level of buffering today, not, 5-10 years from today. So instead of saying it needs to be effective, I just said it needs to be a minimum height of 6 feet. If the board would like a higher height, or if we wanted to work on that a little bit, we could, but that gives us a clear number to point to that's higher than 4 feet without us having to have an awkward discussion with the applicant about the specific species and what its growth pattern is like and how high would it need to be before it effectively gave you screening to 4 feet. Then the last bullet there, fences and walls. So, and this is something I added, I feel personally like, and you may not agree, a good quality solid vinyl fence might be a good alternative to wood, concrete, or stone, and also masonry, so being able to use like a brick or other faux stone, I think would be potentially appropriate. And then also to incorporate planting to soften the public appearance if feasible. So if they have a very tiny area in which they can put this buffer, then maybe the board would allow just fencing. But really the intent when you flip to the second page is that last picture, narrow buffer with a 6-foot high fence and trees, the intent there is that, if you're doing a development and you are required to have a buffer, you need to allocate more than a foot for your buffer. like you have to factor that into your design. And this picture clearly shows shrubs and trees. So that's at least, a width of, I would say, minimum of 5 feet, maybe 8 feet. I mean, we're talking some width there to be able to put a planting in. So at the bottom of this page, I put a section about required buffers, which we didn't really have, that says when it's required, it must follow the requirements for the wide buffer. Not, if we're requiring you to have a buffer, it can't be the skinny little thing. And if using a fence or a wall, given some additional options for what the materials can be. I'm open to this being a starting point for a discussion with the board. If you feel like there's some things in here that you don't like let's say vinyl fence, or you think that's being too restrictive, saying that the required buffer needs to be a bit wider, open to all of those discussions. But we're hoping to get something that's a little easier as staff to implement and clearer, and also easier for the board.
Jana?
Just 2 things. I mean, generally speaking, yay. And we have had a lot of conversations about buffers. In your addition of the required buffer section, is it clear in a bulk chart somewhere when buffers are required and the width? So because we're talking about width, and I think the intent behind it is one that makes sense and is supported by the visuals, and which we support. But when we had a room full of people who were a little concerned and cranky about the addition of a solar panel farm, right? and there was plenty of land between their property line and the building area even. There was 4 feet trees, I believe, involved, not a berm, not a fence, right? And so this is a really good example. Is there something somewhere other than your yellow box, which still has when required, so you're
Yeah.
referencing something else, about the width of the buffer that like gets at that?
So we have some interesting notes in Article 11. And I may defer to David because he's been studying Article 11 for many more years than I have. But there are some specific spots where it talks about a 25-foot buffer area shall be maintained. But one of my questions and concerns has been, what is that? Is it a 25-foot area, like essentially a setback? Or is it 25 feet of planting? Like, it doesn't specify what the planted area is. It kind of leaves it up to, I think, staff and planning board to determine that. And so really, I think these standards are meant to provide that requirement. And when we say, if I'm saying, okay, you have to use the wide one, if we're saying you need to have a buffer, then, you know, at least we have a minimum width of some kind.
So would it be up to staff discretion, or if I'm putting my industrial use per use chart next to the residential property per zoning map, do I know that because of my use, it's a wide buffer? Or I'm thinking of the places, we've seen things come in front of us where the developer developing the property has minimized the available buffer space to get to the maximum building space, right? And so I guess I'm saying, like, if they come forward and there's a property, I really loved Trinity's, so I'm just, no harm, no foul, but they didn't have a footprint and the building took up the max footprint, right? Now, if that, as an example, except it's an industrial use, that particular parcel, would it never come to us because you at some point would have said, nope, your use requires a buffer, and thus you need to reduce the size of your development and impermeable surface on the property to make way for a wide buffer, because it's an industrial use that requires a wide buffer. And love the yellow box. I don't really need you to say yes to all that, but if we're gonna do this, where else are you going to bring forward changes to us that supports you doing this? I'm happy to make the step today, but.
That's like when they're building the, on Strawberry Avenue, the storage facilities, and the houses are on Libby, and it was a berm, but it was, you know, I mean, it's not industrial, but it's that, I remember that came up, do we have you know, if the tree's tall enough, or the houses are higher, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Great questions. I think that there's still a little bit of lack of clarity in our ordinance for sure on this topic. Yeah.
Whenever you go through development review and there's a change of use, the ordinance says that you're supposed to have a buffer, like when it abuts residential use. So, to Shanna's point, where the setback is 10 feet, that setback has to be a buffer, and right now we would tell them, hey, great, it's either staggered row of plantings or some type of opaque fencing. This just makes it abundantly clear that you've got to make the requirements of a buffer that's more than 5 feet wide. There are areas, Shelley's absolutely right, where in the space and bulk chart, it references like certain areas where there's a bigger buffer required.
Yeah.
And it's not clear. It says you have to have a 25-foot buffer. It doesn't say, is that 25 feet of fencing and plantings? The way we've interpreted it in the past is no, you just have an additional setback in that area.
But somewhere there's something directing you 10-foot buffer, 20-foot buffer based on use, and this will give you the ability to say, if you are required to have a 5-foot buffer or more, this is what it looks like.
And if it says you need to have a 25-foot buffer, well, great, somewhere within that 25-foot buffer, you have to do this.
Josh?
So just a few things. One, I think, you know, some people like vinyl. I hate it. So I noticed that metal wasn't mentioned at all, any type of metal fencing at all. And in some cases, I think opaque fencing is somewhat challenging in certain ways, like, and certainly in downtown areas. I know that I would not feel comfortable walking to a parking lot that I couldn't see into. So just thinking about things where do we break that up, right? So that, like, for instance, if you had like a metal piece that was like a screen piece that you could actually see into the parking lot, right? Like, because you're trying to distract view, right? But you're not necessarily trying to obscure the existence of anything behind it. You know what I mean? In certain cases. So just as like a side thought on that. And then the pedestrian walkways being included in the buffers, could we put those pedestrian walkways closer to the structures and basically buffer from roads as a consideration? So if somebody's going to, for instance, if you're going to count a sidewalk or a walkway as a buffer, instead of putting it directly on the road, having that buffered space in between. Do you follow what I'm saying on that?
I think so, but I think this intent is to cut through the buffer, just like what it's saying is, if you're required to have a buffer, it doesn't mean that you can't get a walkway to go pass through it.
Gotcha.
Cut through
Okay.
that way, not this way.
The way I was reading it was, okay, I can just put a sidewalk on the side of the road and call it a buffer.
No.
Okay, that's fine. And then just as one other little piece, and it's not actually named in here, but I just wanted to surface it. The discussion tonight, and Shannon, you reminded me of this, with Trinity Jubilee Center, where they said that they were going to use like a crushed stone or a riprap in order to, like, basically have pavement that's not pavement. The design standards in downtown, that was the same thing that they did at the Dempsey Center. Like, if we could just remove riprap from any of our downtown, I would really appreciate it, because I think it's really heinous looking. But
I think their crushed stone is crushed stone.
yeah, I mean,
Not
it's,
riprap.
it kind of functions the same way, though. You know what I mean? It's just like dead space. It acts just like pavement.
I mean, it is an
grow in the
alternative
middle of the
to
parking lot
pavement,
out back
sure.
there.
I know, but
I don't disagree with you, Josh. I'll just let you know the comment we hear from people is like short of putting shrubs back there, if it's vegetated, they don't want to maintain it. Which I
I understand, but
totally agree with
it
your
creates a
position.
very ugly city.
I'm
That's
with
all.
you.
Okay.
I hear you. And that's like a decision that, the city has to make, right? Because, I mean,
No, I get you.
we staff gets challenged telling people to mow their lawns, never mind a 5-foot strip behind Trinity, that type of thing. So
Fair enough.
I hear you. It's a challenge for us too.
Shannon?
Sorry, I had more than one in the beginning. I'm happy to take breaks, though. In your spacing of vegetated buffers on page 10, ironically, you need a space between your vegetated and your buffer. It might just be the font that's being used, but it's one word, right above your yellow box.
See it?
Yeah.
Finding it,
And you need a,
It's on page 10.
I think it's your font, because
Page
the,
10. No, I don't think it is, because spacing is.
Oh, thank you.
yeah, it's the title spacing of vegetated buffers actually needs a space. And then, you said this, and I appreciate the clarity that you want this to bring, and I don't think the language that you've offered does.
Okay.
And so that's my thoughtful gift to you, is,
Buffer designs.
Under buffer designs, at a minimum, buffers should consist of one or more of the following approaches and should adhere to the associated standards per option, right? You specifically used an example where you were hoping that it didn't result in a buffer being shrubs here and a fence here and then maybe some brick there. And I don't think I think it could still be interpreted that way. And to Alex's point earlier when he was talking about the fencing and saying, like, I would like the fencing to be a little more visually permeable or maybe a little shorter in the front. I get that it's not a buffer, but I can see that same request from us. I can see the same design coming forward, that if you're asking for the full length of a buffer to be consistently using one of these at a minimum, and any additional layer techniques throughout, But that's not what it says here, and I can see, I don't know, a 1 acre buffer that needs to happen between one of those big industrial uses and a, little cul-de-sac neighborhood on the left, saying, cool, we're gonna use big trees in the back, and then as it gets close to the road to keep it with a neighborhood feel, we're gonna use like a nice fence. And maybe we'd want that, and maybe this flexibility gives it, but it does not read the way I heard you say you wanted it to.
I like the full length part. So what I wrote down was full length of the buffer to be used at a minimum one of these techniques.
Consistently use, not consist of one, consistently use one of these throughout the length of the full. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep, I do.
Yeah, so
I just think it leaves it wiggly for you.
Absolutely, because like you say, if you don't specify, then they could put, 20 feet of trees and 20 feet of fence, stockade, or
Yep.
It's how we do things where I grew up.
whatever we have handy, so.
Or a mile of vinyl,
Yeah, right, yeah.
solid vinyl fence.
Okay. So any other, Michael?
No, you don't like them.
Just to expound on Josh's comment on metal, I think we should include metal fences. And it makes a good point about see-through. I was actually thinking it as we saw the Jubilee Center building, and it looked like wrought iron in the front. And hopefully that's what it does actually look like when it gets built. Because I think wrought iron looks good, especially in urban areas.
I feel like, so that's not a visual buffer. I feel like if somebody was doing, let's say, this dense evergreen planting, and they also wanted to put in a wrought iron fence, go for it. But the fence is really not part of the buffer. So if the fence or wall is being used as a buffer, it needs to be solid.
Okay.
And my concern too, including metal, is I don't want to see a chain link fence with vinyl strips in it, ever.
Preach.
Like ever, if possible.
Some of them actually
Obviously, I
look
have
good.
to, but.
But I know that others don't.
Mine's looking good right now.
I have a neighborhood that has, that sees plenty of different kinds, and the chain linked with the vinyl strips, and when they break and fall apart, it doesn't look good. Then and I guess it's called a buffer. You made a good point. I was just thinking fencing in general, as opposed to buffer and fencing. But, so, speaking of vinyl, the length, if you're at Shaw's, and you came in from East Avenue, and you're exiting Marston Street onto Pleasant, the back lot, you can see a vinyl white, solid white, all the way from Marston to O'Connell. That was considered a buffer at the time, a buffer from the two properties that exist there, the one on the corner of O'Connell and the next one that's on the corner of Marston. I actually thought that fencing looked pretty good at the time, and it still does, because it holds up. But
Okay. Alex?
it's solid.
So maybe, while we're on the subject of fences here, perhaps moving high quality so it doesn't just describe vinyl, but describes all of the fencing materials. Just because, a crappy concrete wall.
Or crappy
fence.
stockade fence.
Yeah,
doesn't look-
that's
Yeah.
just not, I think saying high quality, durable materials
Big
such
fan of durable.
as
Right.
wood. And I think to the point of the white vinyl fence, because I think that is sort of like where vinyl tends to show its aesthetic failings. I'm reading in between the lines here, it seems like the intent is that we're choosing materials that are natural and reference the natural environment around them, with wood or concrete, which is like, an earth product, or masonry, an earth product, or stone. So somehow incorporating some language that says, in the bottom here, incorporate planting to soften the appearance if feasible. Something along those lines that's like, choosing a material that complements
The area.
the area and
The natural environment.
the surrounding natural environment and other chosen buffer techniques. Because, you don't want to have a stockade fence on top of a berm and it's gonna fall over eventually. You
in
want
the whole-
something that
yeah,
works with what it's being placed with.
Patterned, whatever,
So-
yeah, exactly.
Material that complements the surrounding natural and built environment, like if I have a brick
Right.
building and I want
Sure.
to do a brick wall, like.
That sounds good.
Okay.
I'd be fine with an Art Deco vinyl fence. I would be.
Yeah, okay. Okay, anybody else have any other comments? Questions?
Did you catch all that, and can we say as amended and move this forward, or do you want to bring it
I
back and us
did,
just?
although this is a question, so, since we have
Yeah.
some changes, well, actually, I think we're pretty clear on all the other changes, so we could move all this forward. I feel confident we could move this forward. Do you? What? Oh, this doesn't have to go to council, so why doesn't this just come back to you next?
That's what I'm asking. No one will make a
I
motion if
forgot.
that's the case.
Yep, well, this will just come back to you with a revision that hopefully hits those.
And we won't have
goals.
any of this discussion. We'll just be like, awesome, make a motion.
Right.
Move it on.
Okay,
Sounds good.
okay. So we're done with public hearings and other business.
Oh, yeah, we
We're at
probably
other
should.
business.
We are at other business.
Can we do a motion to continue the design standards to next meeting?
Oh, yeah.
So,
Do I need any preamble, or are we good?
I can make the motion.
go ahead, Josh, go ahead.
I would like to make a motion to continue the discussion concerning the citywide design standard guidelines and standards to the next meeting, per our discussion.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Roger Dupree,
Yes.
Joshua Najin.
Yes.
Michael Marcotte. Shanna Cox.
Yes.
Christine Kittredge.
Yes.
Amy Smith.
Yes.
Lucy Bisson, yes. Okay, so now we're at other business. And I have to tell you that I was very upset when I watched the city council meeting and then read the article in the newspaper in which we were, in total, and one of our members in particular, was thrown under the bus for the fiasco of 860 Lisbon Street. We have asked, the planning board and several planning boards have asked several times that we be included in discussions relating to planning certain projects. We are not, and I understand that we are not privy to the executive session discussions. That's what the problem is. We are not privy to these discussions, and then we are given information, half information, and we are expected to rubber stamp a project, and we are not a group of people who will rubber stamp a project without a good reason. We asked repeatedly for clarification, for information specific about the project. At the time of the meeting, we were told that Mr. Gendron possibly had a project, mixed use, wasn't really sure. It couldn't be discussed what his project was. In the city council meeting and in the article, we're told that it's senior housing and retail or restaurant or something. What's the story? You know, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was fit to be tied. I was pissed. I was very, very angry. And I was very angry for Mr. Marcotte for the way that Mr. LaChapelle treated him and spoke about him, and the way that he treated and spoke about all of us. And I wonder what's the point of having the planning board? Because we're not included in planning. And that's my rant. Mr. Marcotte.
Is one aspect of what you just said. that were not included in executive sessions. I can't remember the specific situation, but having served on on the planning board for 8.5 years before moving on to the council, I hope it's not just a sense, but an actual memory. We were invited to an executive session on one occasion because of the nature of the discussion, and I don't know whether it was staff or the council or how it came about, that maybe we should include the planning board. And we've asked several times last year, because of the number of acquisitions and dispositions, particularly Park Street comes to mind, for that courtesy. And it has not been afforded to us. And then we get to this situation, and it becomes what it does because we weren't afforded that courtesy. Maybe if we were in on the discussions, or maybe not every little, because sometimes those executive sessions are plentiful. During my time on the council, we would discuss an issue again and again and again, meeting after meeting. Maybe we don't need to be in every little detail, but somewhere in the middle, I wouldn't say just at the end when it's all said and done, but somewhere towards the beginning or the middle, so that the council understands where we're coming from, and we understand what's happening, and we understand that if we're invited, we cannot speak about what happens there either, until it's all over and done with. And maybe if we understood some of the details, some of it's now coming out conflicting. You hear something from one side, and then you hear something from the other side, and you don't know which side to believe. Maybe if we were invited, it would be clearer to us. There wouldn't be any, well, this is what was said, or somebody has changed their mind during the process and presented a different case here than what was presented somewhere else. For that clarity, I think the next time we have an acquisition or disposition, we should be invited to that executive session, or if it's a series of them, up front, so that we can have better relations with the council. And it shouldn't be conflict.
Josh?
One of the things that kind of stood out was that we were accused of being anti-development. And since I've been sitting on this planning board, I don't think there's one development we've actually turned down. We refused to zone Charles Street highway business at the behest of the Charles Street neighborhood and invited a contract zone. We voted against the purchase of 75 Park Street, and we voted against selling Martell to one developer based on not continuing the LHA agreement. The thing that stands out about all three of these things is all of the relevant and pertinent information was not made available to us to make a clear decision on any of it. So at the end of the day, lack of development within Lewiston has been an issue that has come up several times, not specifically to this planning board. This has been a pattern that's happened for years. So it's not when you think about it, it's probably not the planning board's problem. It is a problem for us, but it's not.
It's not this particular
exactly.
planning board's problem. It is a problem, a systemic problem.
And while I appreciate that, one of the developers spoke out saying that he funds many nonprofits in our community, I absolutely, appreciate that. But the city runs on a tax base, not charity. And planning on a solid foundation for the future of the city is what we're trying to do. So we do need the information in order to make clear decisions.
Anyone else would like to make any comments in this regard?
I do, but I'll go after Shane.
Okay. No, go ahead, Alex.
I was sort of hearing everyone's comments. I haven't read the newspaper article, and I did not watch the city council. To the more experienced, longer-serving members of this board, what procedural mechanisms do we have to invite the council here? You know, if it is difficult to try to, you know, go into meetings where decisions are being made, what tools do we have specifically that we could offer up?
None.
In terms of being able to communicate with them directly, like, are we allowed to approach and talk to city council, or does it have to go through staff?
No, we can talk to them. It's just that you'd have to come to a city council meeting and talk in public. There's no private, you know, we are not included in the executive sessions at this time. We have not been asked. We have not been invited.
In terms of the mechanism for going to talk at a city council, however, it would be an individual member going to speak as an individual member, not on behalf of the whole board.
Right.
Are there mechanisms for the whole board to speak to the city council?
I don't know of any.
Other than you folks, maybe, you know, a letter is drafted that all you folks, you know, sign or acknowledge and support or something, and then, you know, maybe the chair presents that to something with some effect. Because that has happened in the past where a chair has come to a council meeting, and while I think he was sharing the sentiment of the board, he was really expressing his own opinions at that time, and that is a problem. So none of us want that to come across where an individual shows up at a council meeting representing the board where you're really not at that point. If you had some letter of support or something that's acknowledged, signed by all you folks, and it was presented or even emailed to them, I think that's something. As far as executive sessions, Mike's right. I can't think of what it is, but I feel like we've done it maybe twice in my tenure.
At least once.
I have a feeling that for the Walmart warehouse, I think that was one of them.
And it's certainly a tool you folks have available to you. It's historically, it hasn't been with the council. It's been as the council would do it, though. You having your meeting, and then we break for executive session and either go in the back room or whatever, and then we come back in here. So that is a tool. And we can certainly share that with administration, saying, hey, let's...
But that tool, just to clarify Alex's point, that tool would be a mechanism we would use during the middle of our planning board meeting to enter into an executive session, which we have the right to do, but there would be nothing that would compel the council to show up at that session.
Oh, not at all.
We could use that to draft a letter, though.
Gotcha, okay. So I guess my final point, and then, you know, other folks can speak to this. I think something that's important to remember throughout all of this is that we, as a group, it sounds like, have talked in this discussion about this being a procedural, structural problem. And I think there are also a lot of, you know, there's definitely a human aspect to this latest round, right? Like, I think
personalities.
There's definitely, like, people are offended, people are hurt, and I think I would really encourage us as a group to think about how we can move forward in a way that helps address the structural issue and tries to have that personal relationship issue or, you know, feelings, whatever you'd like to call it, addressed in a separate track. Because if the structural issue has existed for such a long time, it seems like it's something that's really worth our time as a board to try and address as best as we can and try to be creative about it.
Okay. Shannon? did you-
Easier said than done.
Yeah. Shannon?
I think it's a great suggestion, and might we ask for staff to share with us any relevant parts of council and our bylaws or charters that might help us understand the procedural pieces, just so that there's like an action step related to your thought, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, so I did follow all of the pieces, and as somebody who represents business interests during her day job in this region, was really frustrating for me as well to hear that the takeaway message by those present, by those speaking, by those reading the headlines, is that we've been an anti-development board. And I think it's really important. I appreciated Josh listing the 3 times that we might have taken actions that were perceived as anti-development. I would like to note that we have redeveloped the adult drinking and venue the adult use marijuana, the medical use marijuana, the ordinances that reflect all of those, that we have taken significant steps to clarify and broaden and increase the number of parcels contained in business and development ordinances and zones throughout the city in some of the most major business corridors, that we've worked proactively, and we have joined the city council in a joint workshop, the first of multiple sessions, the next is which tomorrow, in an ongoing effort to ensure not only that we are pro-development and heard as pro-development in and outside of the city of Lewiston, but that we are working in an aligned way towards those shared goals. And what came through at that first joint session was a really clear North Star that we shared those goals. And while there's minutia in which we're navigating the details as we've reviewed the maps, multiple sessions to send back to City Council to approve, that there is a lot of pro-development conversation and a desire by this board that is shared by the council to see positive development, significant development, development that increases the tax base, and over again, like tonight, development that adds housing units to the city of Lewiston and its tax rolls. We've named that. We've named that with the council, we've named that in this board, and we've done so repetitively for years. And so that message of anti-development is inaccurate, at the least.
So I would ask the board, do you feel that you would like to send a letter to administration, to the council? If we do, I would like to have an executive session at the next board meeting.
You can't just have an executive session. You have to, there's certain sections of statute that you have to reference in order.
Well, that's why I'm saying at the next meeting to follow whatever statutes we have to do,
So
because I know it's got to be advertised.
We'd like to make requests to staff to place executive session and the necessary language on our next agenda.
To discuss what?
To discuss writing a letter.
Don't think that's going to be an we can check, but it's personnel issues, it's real estate negotiations, and I feel like there's a third one. It's driven by statute, and we can give you guys, we can send you an email so you just see what that is. I think you can have that as another business item, and you guys can just talk about it, but I don't know that you can do it in an executive session. We can check, but I'm betting you can't.
Okay, Michael?
A little confused on the topic of executive sessions, and it seems to be different facets here. There was a mention of possibly we went in, or this board went into an executive session about Walmart. That was probably before my time.
That would have been with the city council.
With the city council.
I mean.
Therefore, the city council can invite, that's where I was going with this, the city council can invite the planning board to an executive session that they're having.
They could.
No, it's not likely that, we would have an executive session where we would invite them. That just seems awkward. It'd be like somebody at a lower stature inviting somebody from above to be in ours. And I sense that I wasn't the one that I could remember, and I think I remember a second one now. One was real estate, and what real estate was, I don't know. And this, of course, the current issue is real estate. And the other one was when the board was asked to reverse a decision. I think Dave might remember that.
Oh, for the parking garage, right?
I'm having a hard time remembering what the issue was. I just remember somebody yes, it was. It was an aspect of the parking garage. And we made a decision, and somebody didn't like the decision. Not sure if it was the council or staff. I sense it was staff. We went into executive session, and somebody came out and made the motion to reconsider, and it went differently. That just didn't seem to be right, and I don't know what category that would fall under when you were naming those three categories. It's not a personnel issue, really.
Executive session is a discussion or consideration of employment, appointment, assignment, duties, promotion, demotion, compensation, evaluation, discipline, resignation, dismissal of an individual or group of public officials, appointees, or employees from a body or agency.
That's one category.
The next one is discussion or consideration by a school board of suspension or expulsion of a public school student or a student at a private school or one that has public funds involved. Discussion or consideration of the condition, acquisition, or use of real or personal property permanently attached to real property or interest therein, or disposition of public held property or economic development only if premature disclosures of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the body or agency. They use that one all the time.
Yes.
Discussion of labor contracts, consultations between a body and agency and the city attorney with respect to legal rights and body of agency. They do that one all the time.
Sorry, but I'm going to pause you there. So theoretically, and to Alex's point, this board could request an executive session to meet with our city attorney to review the relevant parts of statute, charter, and ordinance that dictate the relationship between city council and the board.
You could make that request.
I don't know that it's going to get met, but like, that's the thing. And if we're going to look at any of that stuff and request a structural change in the ongoing relationship or communications between those two governing bodies, I'm assuming you're going to want a lawyer in the room at some point anyway.
Just the real challenge is when you discuss something in executive session, it binds those people from having conversations outside of executive session as well. So that means that even if it was something that shouldn't have been necessarily confined to executive session, now it's locked there. So that, again, if it's information we need, we can't get it. So.
Yeah, I hear you, yeah. There's a few other categories there as well, but that's the ones that I'm most familiar with is the real estate negotiations and negotiations with the city attorney, and that happens, the negotiating contracts or, I don't know, something else that's dysfunctional that's occurring with the council that they will go into executive session about.
So you just read off 4, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's number 3, if I was counting correctly, that seems to apply in this case perfectly. And I'm not sure which one of those would apply to the one that I was referring to about the parking garage, because it wasn't a real estate negotiation. It was just a disagreement that the planning board didn't do what somebody wanted, whether it was staff or council or both. So, yeah, I think number 3 applies perfectly.
It certainly doesn't. I know we've done that in the past, so the point being is...
It would simply have to be council that was doing the inviting.
If you want to be invited to their executive session, if you want to have your own executive session, you can.
Good.
I suppose you could, in this situation, Lincoln was privy to those conversations, and you folks could continue the matter or not provide the recommendation or make a request to go into executive session.
We could make the request to go into executive session and hear what he had to say, because it would be in executive session, and then I'd come back out here and have a more informed decision.
Only if what he was privy to didn't occur in the city council's executive sessions.
Because he wouldn't be able to discuss it at that time.
Only if...
That would defeat the purpose.
Right.
So it would have to be with council.
Yeah, it has to be with
City
council.
council, not
You'd have
attorney
to
council.
advertise it as well, so I don't think just on the whim you could say, let's break into executive session. You'd have to...
No, I knew that. I
But-
knew we had to, that's why I was saying advertise executive session so we can go
And when the city council has an executive session, it can include a developer. It includes members of staff appropriate to the discussion. It could include the planning board. It could include anybody they thought they wanted to, and that probably should be limited to those who have a role to play, as opposed to anybody. But obviously, we have a role to play when we're making decisions on acquisition and disposition.
Well, not just acquisition and disposition. Yeah, this was an acquisition and disposition. Alex, go ahead.
I think it sounds like executive session for this body is an inappropriate mechanism for discussing a letter to write to council to suggest systemic changes. I propose that doing something like that is probably the most productive thing we can do right now to show the world at large, and then also to work through this ourselves to figure out if there are places where we can collaborate better, have better flow of information, and produce better outcomes. Can I propose anything as an associate member? I would propose that we put writing, looking into better structural changes or existing structural pathways and highlighting those in a memo or a letter on the next meeting agenda, and then we do so in our general meeting.
Okay, as in other business.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll just add to that too, because I'm thinking, oh, don't do this, folks. If someone is going to take a stab at drafting this and whatnot, as we've mentioned to you folks, usually once a year or whatever, the whole ex parte communication. So Lucy decides to draft a letter, she shouldn't be sharing that, and you folks are all commenting on it and giving contributions
can't do that.
through email. You can, Lucy could certainly draft the letter and have that come to the meeting as Alex is suggesting, and then, have that discussion about what content should be in.
What I was gonna suggest is that everybody take a stab, write up something, and if everybody sends it to me, that's not ex parte, because we're not going back and forth.
It's shady.
Well, no, but then I can combine it and into a draft that we can come to the meeting and work with. Or everybody brings their suggestions and then we put it together.
Can I offer an alternative?
Sure.
I think any one of us drafting a letter, but after the next meeting, I need to see materials that they haven't brought forth yet. And I think if the next meeting is to introduce the relevant pieces of guiding local language that calls into our awareness what the mechanisms are that city council uses, that we could have available, and we were able to discuss it on the agenda item, I think the wrap-up of that conversation could look like, okay, so we're all in agreement that section 36B-D54 is the most relevant. Like, I think any one of us drafting a letter based on a communal conversation we had after being presented those materials would set us up for success. And I think any 8 versions of letters in advance of that presentation would not set us up for success.
I agree. To be specific, I think the next meeting should focus on bringing materials together, both from our own documents as well as I'm sure other towns and cities have had the same issue, and looking, as members, we can all do research to see how other communities have overcome these challenges and provided themselves with a better working relationship between their two bodies. So I think, I agree.
So-
Let's bring materials next time with an eye towards.
So I will ask staff to give us the particulars on executive sessions and who does what, and maybe send that to us ahead of time so that we can have a chance to look at it and do our own research, and then have a discussion on this at the next board meeting. Okay. Last item, reading of the minutes. Motion to adopt the,
I had something under other business.
okay, I apologize.
I've been wanting to bring this to various meetings, and the night that we spoke about the topic, I wished I had them here at that time. There's a book entitled Tax Increment Financing. I think you can still find some on the Amazon.com. And Economic Development by, it says edited, by Craig L. Johnson and Joyce Y. Mann with one N. It was a great read, maybe 10 years ago. Talks all about the inception of tax increment financing back in the 60s and 70s and how it was used. And sort of maybe my perceptions were defined by this book. And it seems different the way that Lewiston has done it. And that might be because of state of Maine statute. Most of this started in other states, particularly Midwestern states. And when Josh mentioned creating an entire TIF district down the riverfront, I really like that idea. And this book kind of talks to that kind of TIF district, as opposed to project by project. I've got one soft cover and this hard cover. If I can ever find the original one, I'd share it around. And if you want to get a copy yourself, and think I'm not that electronic savvy. You can probably even read it online. No, what would you, there's a special tablet? For
Kindle.
that? Kindle. So I just wanted to bring that up because we'll probably have a follow-up conversation at some point to the one we had a couple of meetings ago.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in that case, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the February 13th draft minutes.
I move we accept the minutes as written.
Do I have a second? Roger. All those in favor? Okay, and motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Right here.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay. Don't forget your...
Well, I heard Roger's voice, I don't know. What did you think?
So I was just saying.
Well, maybe you promised that they'll come out before I have to sit in it again.
Really like
Second edition.
That's real.
You can buy it for $35.
What's the setup in the room tomorrow? This was not the fun workshop, but more like,
So-
we had one of those coming, but was this maybe it?
This is fun workshop. This is
Oh,
gonna be a
no.
horseshoe.
Well, it's a presentation, it's not really a
Are we
workshop.
gonna move around at any point during tomorrow's workshop, or are we gonna sit stationary?
So there's a table over
Wasn't there a
there.
fun one coming, Shelley? We talked about this.
It's the fun one.
Yeah.
The only reason to move tomorrow is to use the restroom.
Yeah, we were like, Shanna's missing the thing.
Everything from you, everything.
Make you miss your yellow stickies. It was really fun.
That's good.
We'll see.